Hey fam. This is Prime Fiction. Today's story is gonna blow your mind. Naruto was the primordial fox deity who arrived in Supernatural, and Castiel Gabriel and Crowley all bowed before him. Show some love with a like and subscribe. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Fox Wakes the Crows Left First. That was what old Gerald Hatch noticed, standing on his back porch with a coffee mug going cold in his hand. 300 acres of Kansas cornfield, and every crow that had roosted in the eastern tree line for the past 11 years simply lifted off at 4:47 in the morning and flew south like they'd received a memo. Not panicked, that was the thing that stuck with Gerald. Panicked birds screamed. These ones just went, quiet and purposeful, as if they'd been politely informed their services were no longer required. He told his wife Martha about it over breakfast. Martha told him to take his blood pressure medication. By noon, Gerald had forgotten about the crows, because something considerably stranger was happening to his cornfield. The stalks were bowing. Not bent, bowed. Like subjects before a throne, every stalk in a perfect 200-foot circle had inclined itself toward the center of the field, leaves pressed flat, as if paying respect to something standing at the middle of it all. Gerald walked out to the edge of the circle and stood there for a long time. The air smelled different. Not bad different. Good different, in a way he couldn't name, like the first morning after a long winter, like rain on hot stone, like something he'd been trying to remember his whole life and never quite caught. He took 17 photographs on his phone and posted them to a farming forum at 1:15 p.m. By 3 p.m. the post had 40,000 views, and someone had already tagged a number in the replies with the caption, "These guys handle this kind of thing." Dean Winchester's phone rang at 3:47 p.m. while he was eating a gas station sandwich that he would later describe as a war crime. He looked at the number. Unknown, Kansas area code. He looked at Sam across the hood of the Impala. Sam was already on his laptop, head tilted, reading something with the particular expression he wore when reality was being rude to him again. "Heads up," Sam said, without looking up. "Got 3 separate reports out of Rooks County, Kansas. Animal behavior, localized atmospheric anomalies, and," he paused, scrolled, "corn that's apparently doing something corn shouldn't do." Dean's phone kept ringing. "Could be a ghost," Dean said, though he didn't sound like he believed it. "Ghosts don't make corn bow." "Rougarou? Also no. Pagan god?" Sam finally looked up. "I've been cross-referencing for 20 minutes. Nothing fits." The ley line activity in that area spiked to levels I've never seen before in any of Bobby's records or the bunker archives. "Whatever this is, it's not," he turned the laptop around so Dean could see the screen, "it's not small." The graph on the screen was less a line and more a vertical cliff face. Dean dropped the rest of his sandwich in the trash. "Get in the car." They drove through the night, trading the wheel every 3 hours, the Kansas flatlands unrolling ahead of Baby's headlights like a scroll being read aloud. Sam slept for 2 hours and spent the other 4 reading. Dean drove with the radio low, classic rock bleeding through the speakers, and tried not to think about how the graph on Sam's laptop had looked. He'd seen a lot of graphs. Angels, demons, Leviathan, the darkness herself, he'd seen the readouts for all of them. This one hadn't looked like any of those. It had looked like the equipment had panicked. They hit Rooks County just past dawn, the sky going that particular shade of washed-out gold that Kansas morning specialized in. Gerald Hatch met them at the edge of the property. Dean had called back, used the FBI cover without enthusiasm, and Gerald had been so relieved to see anyone official that he hadn't questioned the suits that fit slightly too well to be government issue. "It's still doing it," Gerald said, leading them through the dew-heavy grass at the field's edge. "I checked this morning. Hasn't moved. Stalks are still bowed. I tried to walk into the circle last night and my legs just," he stopped, shook his head. "Wouldn't. Like walking into a wall you can't see. Felt like being told no by something real polite but real serious." Dean glanced at Sam. Sam was writing in his journal. They reached the edge of the circle and both of them stopped. Dean had been doing this job for most of his life. He had stood in rooms where angels bled and at the edge of the cage where Lucifer screamed. He had looked the darkness in the face. He knew what power felt like. It felt like a hand around your throat, like the air deciding it didn't want you anymore, like pressure behind the eyes and copper on the tongue. This didn't feel like that. This felt like standing at the edge of a very old forest and realizing, slowly, that the forest was aware of you. Not threatening. Just aware. Patient in a way that had nothing to do with waiting, because waiting implied the possibility of running out of time, and whatever was here had never once worried about running out of time. Huh, Dean said. Yeah, Sam agreed. Gerald pointed toward the center of the circle. There's someone sitting in there. Been there since about an hour ago. I called out and he waved at me, but, Gerald lowered his voice even though there was nothing around for miles but corn and sky. He didn't look right. Not wrong, just. You know when someone looks like they're in a painting? Like the light sits on them different? Dean was already moving toward the circle's edge. The invisible barrier Gerald had described was absolutely there. He felt it the moment he got within arm's reach, a pressure that was precisely calibrated to the word no in a language older than English, older than Latin, older than whatever the first humans had called language. It didn't hurt. It didn't threaten. It simply communicated, with extraordinary clarity, that the space within was occupied. Then it dissolved. Just like that. Between one heartbeat and the next, the resistance was gone, and the air tasted like that smell again, rain on stone, first morning after winter, and from the center of the circle a voice called out, easy and warm, carrying across 200 feet of genuflecting corn without effort. Oh good, took you guys long enough. I've been waiting since like 5 in the morning. Do either of you have any instant ramen on you? I had some but I've been here a while. Dean looked at Sam. Sam looked at Dean. They walked into the circle. He was sitting on a fence post that had no business being in the middle of a cornfield. Gerald would later swear it hadn't been there the day before, legs crossed, arms folded behind his head, face tipped up to catch the early sun. He looked like someone had asked the universe to describe a young man and the universe had been in a good mood that day, tall enough, lean enough, dressed in an orange and black jacket that had absolutely no right being as clean as it was given he'd apparently spent the night in a cornfield. His hair was the color of late summer wheat, wild in a way that suggested it had never once been formally introduced to a comb. He wore what might have been a headband, a flat metal plate on a strip of faded cloth, tied at the back, like it was the most natural thing in the world. His eyes were closed against the sun. Naruto, he said, before either of them could speak, opening his eyes and looking at them. His eyes were blue, the kind of blue that doesn't exist in normal human irises, the kind that belongs to deep ocean trenches and clear skies seen from very high altitude, the kind that made you feel, briefly, that you were the one being examined and not the other way around. He hopped off the fence post and landed with zero sound despite the dry ground. That's my name. You're the Winchesters, right? Dean and Sam. I've been hearing your names a lot lately. From who? Dean said, hand already drifting toward the gun at his hip out of pure muscle memory. Naruto glanced at the gun with an expression that was not contemptuous or alarmed but simply, gently, amused, the way a person might look at a child who'd brought a toy sword to a conversation. From the world, he said. It talks about you two more than you'd think. He looked at Sam. You're the one that reads a lot. You've got that look. That look, Sam repeated. Like you're always 3 questions ahead of yourself. Naruto tilted his head. What's your first question? Sam opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. What are you? Human first question and you go straight to the deep end, Naruto said, grinning. It was a remarkable grin. It didn't fit neatly into any category Dean's threat assessment brain had developed over decades. It was not the grin of something pretending to be friendly. It was the grin of something that was genuinely, unreservedly delighted to be having this conversation. I'll answer that one, but maybe not right this second. Ask me something easier first. I like to warm up. Did you do this? Dean gestured at the bowing corn, the circle, the absence of crows. The corn? Naruto looked around like he'd forgotten about it. Yeah, sorry about that. I wasn't trying to make a whole thing. I just woke up here and the field was being polite. He shrugged. Things in the ground are old. Old things remember me. Woke up, Sam said slowly. You were asleep. Long time. Naruto stretched both arms above his head, cracked his back with the casual thoroughness of someone who'd been sedentary for longer than was reasonable. Really long time. You know how you sleep in on a Sunday and then when you wake up you can't tell if it's been 2 hours or 6? Like that, but the Sunday was about 3,000 years. The number landed in the conversation like a stone in still water. Dean stared at him. 3,000 years. Give or take. Naruto dropped his arms. I lose track around the millennium mark. Numbers stop meaning much after a while. He looked at Dean with those impossible eyes and tilted his head again, a gesture that was distinctly, unsettlingly, reminiscent of a fox listening to something underground. You've got a second question. You're deciding whether to ask it. What woke you up? Dean said. Something shifted in Naruto's expression. Not darkened, not quite, but the easy warmth condensed into something more precise, the way sunlight focuses through a lens. Something broke, he said. Big. Old. Something that was part of the original architecture. I felt it from wherever I was, and it was the kind of break that doesn't happen by accident. He looked south. One of your seals. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. You know about the seals, Sam said, voice carefully neutral in the way it got when he was trying not to telegraph how alarmed he was. I know about a lot of things. Naruto looked back at them, and for just a moment, less than a second, a flicker that both brothers caught and neither would be able to fully describe afterward, his eyes weren't blue. They were gold. Deep, hot, ancient gold, the color of something that had been burning since before the earth had a name. Then they were blue again and he was smiling. Relax. I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here because when the architecture breaks, you check on the building. And we're the building, Dean said. You're part of it. Naruto looked at him with something that might have been fondness, which was deeply disorienting coming from something that had apparently been asleep since before the Roman Empire. You and your brother are more load-bearing than you know. I've been watching you two for a while. He paused. Well. Not actively watching. More like, you know how you can be asleep and still kind of aware of what's happening around you. Like that. That is not comforting, Dean said. Wasn't trying to comfort you. Just explaining. Naruto looked around the cornfield, at the bowing stalks, at the sky going full gold now as the sun cleared the horizon, and he breathed in deep with the expression of someone reacquainting themselves with something they'd genuinely missed. The air here is good. It smells like wheat and car exhaust and something frying somewhere. I like it. Gerald Hatch was still standing at the edge of the circle, too far to hear any of this, watching them with the expression of a man who was strongly reconsidering his decision to post those photographs online. Sam pulled Dean aside, 2 steps, which was not far enough to have a private conversation but was apparently the only option available. Dean, he said under his breath. The ley line readings, I know. They didn't spike when he got here. They spiked 2 hours before. Like the lines were responding to something that was already there, Dean finished. He looked back at Naruto, who had sat back down on the fence post and was watching a red-tailed hawk circle overhead with the serene attention of someone watching their favorite show. Yeah. I know. He said things in the ground remember him. I heard him, Sam. That's not a pagan god thing to say. That's not a trickster thing to say. That's not even an archangel thing to say. That's a, don't say it. Dean, I know. I'm processing. Dean turned back to look at Naruto fully. The morning light was doing something to him that it didn't do to other things, not glowing, nothing that obvious, but it sat on him with a kind of ease, like light returning to something that had always been its natural surface. Hey, he called. Naruto looked over. Yeah? The fence post. Where'd it come from? Naruto looked down at it, considering, then looked back up. Needed somewhere to sit. That's not an answer. Sure it is. He grinned again. You just don't like it yet. Dean pinched the bridge of his nose. In 20 years of hunting, he had developed a comprehensive taxonomy of things that could kill him, and an almost equally comprehensive taxonomy of things that were technically on his side but were deeply irritating to deal with. This was shaping up to be the second category, except that the scale of it made every previous entry in that category feel like a footnote. Are you coming with us? Sam asked. He'd walked back toward Naruto without Dean, which Dean noted with a mixture of exasperation and respect for Sam's ability to make social decisions quickly. Naruto looked at him with an expression of mild surprise, as if the question was charming in its directness. Where are you going? We don't know yet. Then yes, Naruto said, as if this were the most reasonable answer in the world. He slid off the fence post and it wasn't there anymore when he moved away, the wood, the post, the nails and all of it, just gone, like the field had quietly absorbed it back. I'll follow up on the seal break. You two were already investigating it. Seems efficient. We're going to need to know more about you, Sam said. You will, Naruto agreed easily. Probably more than you want to, eventually. Are you dangerous? Dean asked. Naruto stopped walking and turned around and looked at Dean with those blue-gold eyes. They weren't flickering now, just blue, just that impossible deep blue, and for a moment the air pressure changed in a way that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with age, the weight of something that had existed before the concepts of danger and safety had been separated from each other. That question doesn't really apply to me, Naruto said simply. Not as a threat. As a statement of fact, delivered with the same tone one might use to explain that a mountain doesn't have an opinion on whether you climb it. But I'm not here to hurt anyone. That's the thing you actually want to know. Dean held his gaze for 5 seconds, which took more out of him than he would ever admit to Sam, and then he jerked his head toward the car. Fine. You're riding in the back. Naruto lit up, genuinely, warmly, like the decision had made him happy in a very uncomplicated way. Do you have snacks? I have half a bag of beef jerky and a moral objection to sharing it. I'll take 3 pieces. They walked back through the circle together, the corn lifting slowly upright behind them as they passed, straightening to attention, returning to ordinary verticality. Gerald Hatch watched all 3 of them approach and settled on the expression of a man who had made peace with not understanding what had just happened. Everything okay? He asked Dean. Define okay, Dean said. Gerald decided not to. Baby sat on the county road at the field's edge, gleaming black in the morning light, looking as solid and reliable as she always did. Sam got in the passenger seat and immediately opened his laptop. Dean took the driver's seat and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel before starting her up. In the rearview mirror, he watched Naruto settle into the back seat, not sprawl, not slump, just settle, with an easy economy of movement that suggested someone who'd been comfortable in far stranger places than the back seat of a 1967 Impala. Naruto looked out the window at the cornfield as they pulled away. Something passed across his face, brief, private, old, and then it was gone, replaced by that steady warmth, and he looked forward and met Dean's eyes in the mirror. You're going to want to call your angel, Naruto said. Dean's eyes narrowed. What? The one who fell. Castiel. Something flickered in Naruto's expression, recognition, the way you recognize something you've been watching from a distance for a very long time. He should know I'm here. It'll be easier if he hears it from you first. He paused. Heaven's going to notice soon enough anyway. Heaven, Sam said. They'll feel the ley lines. They monitor those. Naruto leaned back. Trust me, you want to control that narrative before they start making assumptions. What kind of assumptions? Naruto looked out the window at the Kansas horizon, flat and gold and infinite. The kind that start wars, he said, without any particular drama, like someone noting that it might rain. Call your angel, Dean. Dean reached for his phone. The morning stretched out ahead of them, wide open, the kind of day that felt like it was holding its breath. 40 miles east, in a roadside diner outside of Plainville, a cup of coffee sitting on an empty table went cold, and the spoon in it vibrated once, a single, high, sustained note, and then was still. The waitress who'd been watching it from across the room crossed herself without quite knowing why. 14 miles above the Kansas plains, something that had been circling since before sunrise tilted its wings and turned south, moving with purpose, moving toward the shape it had recognized in the ley lines below, not a threat, not a beacon, not an anomaly. A presence. One it had been told, in the oldest liturgies that predated its own memory, to defer to should it ever return. It turned south and it did not slow down. 3 states away, in a penthouse that smelled of old books and older whiskey, a demon in a very fine suit set down his glass with a precision that suggested the effort of maintaining composure, and stared at the wall for a long moment. His second-in-command said something. He didn't hear it. He was calculating. He was, underneath the calculation, doing something he very rarely did. He was being impressed. Get me a car, Crowley said at last. Not the company car. The good one. Sir, should I? No. No security detail. No entourage. He picked up his glass again, looked at the amber liquid inside it, set it down without drinking. And find me a bottle of Macallan 1926. The real one. He stood, straightened his jacket with 2 crisp tugs. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it with appropriate manners. In the back seat of the Impala, Naruto watched the Kansas sky and smiled to himself, small and unhurried, the way something very old smiles when it sees the threads of a story it's been waiting to watch for a long, long time finally beginning to pull themselves together. The road unrolled. The engine sang. The world held its breath. Chapter 2, What Angels Remember. Castiel had been standing in a field in Nebraska for 6 hours. Not because he was lost, and not because he was waiting for anything in particular, he simply found that standing in open fields helped him think, in the same way that Dean found driving helped him think and Sam found reading helped him think. There was something about flat land under a wide sky that clarified the angelic mind, stripped away the noise of human infrastructure and the constant, crackling interference of prayer, and let him simply be in a way that the garrison had never permitted and that heaven, in its current state, made nearly impossible. He was thinking about the ley line spike. He'd felt it at 4:47 a.m., which was the same moment Gerald Hatch's crows had lifted off their trees in Kansas, and it had hit his grace the way a tuning fork hits a table, a vibration that wasn't painful but was deeply, fundamentally dissonant with everything he understood about the current state of the world. He'd been cataloging supernatural events for the Winchesters for years now. He knew what angel landings felt like on the ley lines, knew what demon convergences felt like, knew what Leviathan activity did to underground water sources. He had references for almost everything. He had no reference for this. What the ley lines had recorded at 4:47 a.m. was not a landing. It was not an arrival. It was more like, and this was the part that had kept him standing in a Nebraska field for 6 hours, it was more like a recognition. The lines hadn't surged in response to something entering the world. They'd surged in response to something that was already in them, something woven into their oldest architecture, stirring from the inside out. Like a chord being played in a piece of music that had been silent for so long you'd stopped noticing the rests. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Dean. Dean said when he picked up, in the specific tone that meant something had happened and he was managing his own reaction to it in real time. Where are you? Nebraska. What happened? You felt the lay spike. 6 hours ago. I've been trying to identify, stop trying, because I'm about to tell you something and I need you to just let me finish the whole thing before you start the angel version of a panic attack. Castiel frowned at the horizon. I don't have panic attacks. You get this thing where you go very quiet and your eyes do the, Dean. There's someone in the car with us. A beat. He told me to call you. He said you'd want to know about him before heaven noticed. The fact that the entity in question had been considerate enough to think about that was, somehow, more alarming than anything else Dean could have said. What is he? Silence on the line. Not the silence of Dean not knowing, the silence of Dean knowing and deciding how to say it. He says his name is Naruto. He looks like a person. He's been, another beat, he says he's been asleep for about 3,000 years. That's not, Castiel stopped. He was going to say that's not possible, but the ley line readings from this morning made several things previously classified as not possible considerably more negotiable. What woke him up? The seal break. He felt it. Castiel went very still. Not the ordinary human vessel's stillness of standing without moving, but the deeper stillness of an angelic consciousness suddenly redirecting every resource it had toward a single problem. He felt a seal breaking, he said. From wherever he was. From sleep. Yeah. Dean, that's not, Cass. Dean's voice was quiet. Not afraid. Something more considered than afraid. Just come to us. I'm texting you the location. Don't. He paused and Castiel heard, faintly, a voice from the back seat, warm and easy, saying something he couldn't make out. He says don't fly in fast. He says come in slow because it'll look aggressive and heaven's already jumpy enough. Castiel blinked. He knows I'm an angel. He knew your name before I said it. A pause. He keeps doing that. Castiel looked up at the Nebraska sky and then, for reasons he couldn't entirely articulate, intuition, perhaps, or something deeper than intuition, something that ran in the same channels as the oldest prayers he'd ever been taught, he said, is he dangerous? On the other end of the line, Dean made a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He said that question doesn't really apply to him. Castiel stood very still for another 3 seconds. Then he said, I'll be there in 10 minutes, and put the phone in his pocket, and stood for one more moment looking at the sky. Something was singing in his grace. He'd noticed it since the 447 spike and had been cataloging it as interference, as resonance, as the normal noise that accompanied unusual supernatural events. He recognized it now, standing in the Nebraska field with Dean's words still in the air around him, for what it actually was. It was recognition. His grace, which was older than his vessel and older than his memories of heaven and older than most things he could name, recognized something. And it was leaning toward it the way plants lean toward light. He put his wings out and flew, slow and angled, the way you approach something you want to look at carefully before it looks back at you. The Impala was parked at a rest stop off I-70, the kind with picnic tables and a vending machine that had given up on half its products. Dean was leaning against the hood with his arms crossed and an expression that Castiel had learned to read as I'm fine but I have a lot of feelings about it. Sam was at a picnic table with his laptop open, typing fast, the posture of someone trying to solve a problem through sheer volume of research. And there was someone sitting on top of the vending machine. Not leaning against it, not standing near it, sitting on top of it, feet dangling, eating something from a crinkled cup with a plastic fork. He had his face turned up and his eyes half closed, and the afternoon light was doing exactly what Gerald Hatch had tried to describe and failed, sitting on him wrong, sitting on him right, sitting on him like it belonged there in a way it didn't quite belong anywhere else. He looked up when Castiel landed. Their eyes met. Castiel's grace genuflected. It was involuntary, total, and instantaneous, and it was the single most disorienting experience of Castiel's very long existence. Not because it was painful or forced, it wasn't either of those things. It was like a bow executed by a very old instinct that existed below conscious thought, below memory, below the layers of heaven's doctrine and millennia of assignment and all the choices that had made Castiel who he was. Somewhere in the deepest architecture of what he was, something recognized what it was looking at and responded the only way it knew how. He felt his grace fold. Not collapse, fold. Like a wing brought in. Like a soldier's salute. Like the unconscious thing a lesser flame does in the presence of a greater one. He stood with his vessel's face carefully composed and said nothing for a long moment. Naruto looked at him with those blue eyes that were also, at certain angles, gold, and the expression on his face was not triumph or satisfaction. It was something quieter. Something almost like warmth, and something almost like sorrow, and something that had been waiting a very long time. "Castiel," he said. "You look good for your age." Dean made a sound from the hood of the car. "You know he's like thousands of years old, right?" "I know." Naruto's eyes hadn't moved from Castiel. "But he looks like he's been through things recently. That takes a different kind of toll." He tilted his head. "You fell. Not just from heaven, that was the second time. The first time was a choice. The second time was something breaking in you that you hadn't known was holding." Castiel felt the accuracy of that like a hand pressed flat against a wound. He walked forward, 3 steps to the base of the vending machine, and looked up at Naruto, studying him with all the precision an angelic mind could bring to bear. He catalogued the vessel, the energy signature, the pattern of the resonance his grace was still quietly singing toward, and he cross-referenced all of it against every archive he'd ever accessed in Heaven's library. Every mythology database. Every ancient text. He found references. Old ones. Older than most of Heaven's filing system, in fact, the kind stored in the archives that junior angels were never given access to, that only the oldest garrison commanders knew existed. "Fox deity," Castiel said. Not a question. Something moved in Naruto's expression, surprise, genuine and unguarded, the first unguarded thing Castiel had seen from him. Then the warmth again, deeper this time. Most angels wouldn't have that reference. Most angels haven't broken into the restricted archives 4 times for research purposes. The corner of Naruto's mouth pulled up. "Fair. The texts are incomplete," Castiel continued, because if he stopped he would have to process the fact that his grace was still bowing and he wasn't ready to do that yet. "They describe you as," he paused, choosing words carefully, "as something that predates the current order. Not the darkness, not the empty. Something concurrent with the formation of instinct itself." "Concurrent's a good word," Naruto said. "I like that better than most of the others." "What are the others?" "The first wild thing," Naruto said, ticking them off with the resigned air of someone reciting titles they'd been given without being consulted. "The breath before speech. The hunger that became wisdom. The ninefold fire." He made a face. "That last one's the Archangel's version. They've always been dramatic." "You know the Archangels," Sam said from the picnic table. He'd given up pretending to type. "No is one word." Naruto looked over at him. "I knew them when they were new." Michael was very earnest. "Lucifer was the most curious thing I'd ever met, that was before the whole," he gestured vaguely, "pride situation. Gabriel was the only one who ever made me laugh, and I've been laughing for a long time, so that's saying something." He paused. "Raphael was the most straightforward. Always admired that about him. The past tense of the last one didn't go unnoticed by anyone." "Raphael is dead," Castiel said. "I know." Naruto looked at him evenly. "I felt that too." The quiet that followed that sentence was the respectful kind. Dean pushed off the hood of the car. "Okay, so, I have about 40 questions and I'm going to start with the most practical one. What is heaven doing right now? Castiel had been dreading this. They've felt the ley lines. I was already getting signals from the garrison before Dean called me. He looked at Naruto. They'll send someone to investigate. Possibly several someones. The current leadership is, he stopped, selecting his words, reactive. Reactive, Dean repeated. That's the word you're using. They're scared, Naruto said plainly. Heaven's been scared since the apocalypse got cancelled. They built their whole operating system around a plan and the plan broke, and scared people with armies are exactly as dangerous as you'd expect. He dropped down from the vending machine in a single fluid motion, landing on the asphalt without sound, and stretched his arms above his head. Who are they going to send? There's an angel named Ishim, no. Naruto's voice didn't change volume or tone, but something in the air changed around the word, a faint shift in pressure, the way a barometer changes before a storm. Not him. Tell them to send someone else. Castiel blinked. You know Ishim. I know what he did. I know what he is. The warmth in Naruto's face was still there, but it had resolved into something more focused, like sunlight through glass. Send someone with better intentions. Preferably someone who was actually in the original garrison, old guard, someone who knows what the restricted archives say. He looked at Castiel. Someone like you, ideally. I can try to redirect. Can you reach Metatron? The name hit the group like a stone thrown into a pool. Sam physically winced. Dean's jaw went tight. Castiel stared. Metatron, Castiel said, with significant care. Is currently, not in heaven, I know. He's been moving around. I've felt him. Naruto looked unconcerned by everyone's reaction. I'm not asking you to trust him. I'm asking you to find him. He wrote down a lot of the old texts. He might have the full version of some things I'd like to see. Why? Sam asked. Because someone has been accessing those texts. Naruto looked south again, in that particular way he'd looked south from the cornfield, not vague, not casual, like something on the horizon was maintaining his attention the way a fingerprint on glass maintains the eye. Someone's been reading up on me. On what I am and how I work, and specifically what my power does to the architecture of the world when it's fully active. He turned back. That's not a coincidence. Dean straightened. Who? Don't know yet. That's why I'm awake. He said it simply, matter-of-factly, the way you say that's why I'm here when you've driven across town for a reason. But underneath the simplicity was something that everyone present felt rather than heard, a steadiness, a certainty, the particular quality of attention that something ancient pays to a problem it has decided to solve. He was not worried. He was not afraid. He was interested, in the way that a storm is interested in a landscape. Castiel's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face did the thing Dean had described, the very quiet thing. Heaven, he said. They want a report. Tell them it was a ley line anomaly. Residual energy from the seal break. Tell them you're investigating personally and you'll report back in 48 hours. Naruto was already moving toward the Impala, apparently operating on the assumption that he was continuing in the car, which nobody had confirmed. That buys us time before they send a team. Castiel looked at Dean. Dean looked at Castiel. The entire conversation they had in that look lasted about 2 seconds and covered approximately 4 different subjects. Do what he says, Dean said. Castiel looked back down at his phone and started composing a response. He was halfway through it when he paused, something occurring to him, a specific detail from the restricted archive texts, the ones he'd read at 3 a.m. during his 4th unauthorized library visit, the ones filed under a category marker that translated, from the oldest available script, roughly as, that which was before classification. The 9 tails, Castiel said. The texts described 9 tails. As, he chose the word carefully, as an index of power. Each one representing, "Don't," Naruto said, and his voice was still calm, still warm, but Castiel felt his grace flinch with something between a warning and a request. "Not yet. Not here." He looked at Castiel over his shoulder, and for a moment his eyes were entirely gold, not flickering, not a flash, fully, completely, breathtakingly gold, like looking into something that had been on fire since the beginning of the world. "When it's time for that conversation, we'll have it. Right now I'm just a guy in your back seat." Castiel finished his message to heaven and sent it, and did not say what he was thinking, which was, "You have never been just anything." He got in the car. The afternoon pushed west and the shadows got long. They drove without a clear destination for a while, which was not unusual for the Winchesters, and Castiel sat in the back with Naruto and noticed, in the way that angels notice things, all the small details that accumulated like evidence, the way road noise changed slightly around Naruto, the way the car's old radio occasionally picked up a frequency between stations that sounded like whine through ancient trees and then resolved back into static, the way Dean's driving, usually aggressive, usually his most physical form of processing, had settled into something more deliberate, more like the driving of someone who was thinking carefully. "Can I ask you something?" Castiel said. "Yeah," Naruto said. He was looking out the window at the flat Kansas expanse going past, watching it with the unhurried attention of someone who had not seen the landscape in 3,000 years and found it still held up. "When my grace responded to you, that wasn't something I chose. It was instinct," Naruto said. "Yeah. Don't be embarrassed about it." "I'm not embarrassed. Castiel considered. "I want to understand it. I don't have a framework for deferring to something involuntarily. It's not consistent with my understanding of free will." Naruto was quiet for a moment, still watching the fields go by. "It's not deference," he said at last. "Not exactly. It's more like, you know how water flows downhill. It's not making a choice. It's just following the shape of the world." He glanced at Castiel. "I'm very old. Your grace is old too, but mine is older, and older things have a certain gravity. It's not about power. It's about depth." He looked back out the window. "The texts got that part wrong. They made it about dominance. It's not that at all." Castiel thought about that for a long time. "What is it, then?" he asked. "Recognition," Naruto said. "Your grace recognizing something it was made in the presence of. Like, the way a song sounds familiar even if you've never heard it before, because it's built from sounds you've known your whole life." He smiled, quiet and inward. "You were made after I went to sleep, but the world you were made from had my fingerprints on it. Your grace knows that, even if you didn't." The radio found that frequency again, whined through ancient trees, and held it for 4 full seconds before dissolving back to static. Dean's eyes found Naruto's in the rearview mirror. Naruto met them without blinking. "You said heaven would be reactive," Dean said. "How reactive are we talking?" "Because I've had angels try to kill me before and I'd like to update the threat assessment." "They won't attack," Naruto said. "Not once they're sure what I am. The old garrison would have doctrine on this: stand down, observe, do not engage." He paused. "It's the ones who haven't read their history that are the problem." "So half of heaven," Dean said. "Probably more than half. Bureaucracies are bad at keeping institutional memory." He stretched his legs as much as the Impala's back seat allowed. "Which is why we want someone old. Someone with the complete texts." Sam turned around from the front seat, which was the physical expression of a question too important to deliver facing forward. "What are the complete texts?" Naruto looked at him. A real look, full and level, the kind that made Sam feel briefly like he was being read the way he read books, quickly, thoroughly, without missing anything. "The original record of what I am. What I was at the beginning. What I agreed to when I chose to take a vessel and what the terms of that agreement meant for the architecture of the world. He held Sam's gaze. Someone's been accessing versions of those texts. Corrupted versions, partial versions. Like reading half a blueprint and deciding you understand the whole building. That's terrifying, Sam said. Little bit, Naruto agreed cheerfully. Who has access to those texts outside of heaven? Demons with very long memories. Some Grigori, if any of them are still around. He said the last part without looking south this time, but something about the way he said it suggested he already knew the answer to whether any Grigori were still around. What are Grigori? Dean asked. Castiel answered before Naruto could. Watchers. The order that fell before Lucifer's rebellion, they were tasked with observation, with recording. They didn't fall through pride. They fell through, he stopped. Through wanting too much, Naruto finished. Through seeing so much for so long that they started believing seeing was the same as owning. He said it without judgment, which somehow made it land harder than judgment would have. The worst ones were the ones who understood the most. Knowledge without, he touched 2 fingers to his chest briefly, a small and private gesture, without the thing in here that tells you what to do with it. That's always been the real danger. The sky ahead of them had gone from gold to the deep amber of late afternoon, the kind that made the fields look like they were lit from inside. Sam was writing in his journal, fast and dense, the pen moving with the particular urgency of someone trying to catch things before they dissolved. Cass, Dean said. Yes. The stuff in the restricted archive. The stuff about, Dean glanced in the mirror, about the 9 tails. What did it say? Castiel thought about the texts. The cramped, ancient script in a language so old it predated angelic filing conventions, the marginalia left by whatever scribe had been allowed access to the primary sources, the single illuminated image that had taken up an entire page and that Castiel had looked at for a very long time in the dark of Heaven's archive before putting the book away. That the full expression of his power restructures the fundamental operating conditions of whatever space it occupies, Castiel said carefully. That it is not destruction and not creation but something prior to both. The text described it as, he glanced at Naruto, as what the world was before it knew how to be the world. Sam put his pen down. Dean drove. Naruto looked out the window at the amber Kansas fields and said nothing, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of something very large sitting very still, not because it was constrained, but because it had all the time in the world and no need to fill it. Then his phone buzzed. He had a phone. This surprised Dean enough that he nearly swerved. When did you get a rest stop? Naruto said, already reading the screen. Vending machine had a prepaid in it. Made it work. He read for a moment and his expression sharpened, not alarmed, nothing like alarmed, but focused in the way a flame focuses in wind. Okay, he said, and the word was different now, crisper, stripped of the warmth without losing the steadiness. Someone just made a move. What happened? Sam asked. Arkansas. He held the phone up so Sam could see the screen, a news alert, a county-level emergency broadcast, the kind of phrasing that tried to describe the incomprehensible in the language of the containable, mass animal deaths, unexplained atmospheric event, evacuation of 3 townships, and underneath the official language, in the comment thread of whatever local forum had picked it up first, someone had written, "It smells like old things. Like something from before. Like something reading a map you can't see." Naruto put the phone down. Someone's activated a resonance point. Using partial architecture. He looked at Dean in the mirror. They're testing. Seeing if I respond. Are you going to? Dean asked. Naruto smiled. It was the same warm smile from the cornfield, but now Castiel could see what sat underneath it, what had always been underneath it, he realized, patient and certain and old beyond the meaning of the word. Tell me where Arkansas is from here, Naruto said. Dean was already reaching for the map. Outside, the last of the amber light died and the sky went deep, going purple at the edges, going the color of the hour before dark when everything in the natural world that knows better goes quiet and still and waits to see what the night is going to do. The Impala turned south. The radio played a song that wasn't on any station that existed. And Castiel, in the back seat, feeling his grace lean gently and involuntarily toward the thing sitting beside him, thought about what Naruto had said, recognition, like a song that sounds familiar because it's built from sounds you've known your whole life, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the sensation of something slotting into place that he hadn't known was missing. He looked out the other window and did not say this. But Naruto, staring at the southern horizon, smiled a little wider, as if he'd heard it anyway. Chapter 3, The King's Courtesy. Crowley had a system. It wasn't written down anywhere because writing things down was for people who needed reminders, and Crowley had not needed a reminder since approximately the 14th century. The system was simple: information first, action second, and between information and action, a very good drink to ensure the quality of the thinking that connected them. He had survived longer than most demons by following this system with religious consistency and by knowing, with the precise instinct of something that had spent centuries reading rooms, exactly when the information he'd collected required him to change his behavior entirely. He had received the first report at dawn. Ley line activity, Kansas, unprecedented scale. He'd filed it under monitor and had his morning coffee. The second report came 2 hours later. 3 townships in Arkansas, resonance activation, partial architecture, and underneath the field operatives clipped language, a shaking quality, a specific way the sentences ran too short, that told him the demon who'd written it had been frightened in a way that demons weren't supposed to be capable of anymore. He'd moved the file from monitor to immediate attention and had his second coffee standing up. The third report wasn't a report. It was a memory, and memories weren't supposed to work this way in demons, who traded their better cognitive functions for power and longevity and didn't generally get them back. But this one surfaced whole and complete, dredged up from whatever remained of the human soul that had once been Fergus Roderick MacLeod, from a depth so far below his operational consciousness that he hadn't known it was there. His mother, drunk and contemptuous as always, telling him a story she'd heard from her own mother, who'd heard it from hers, going back so far the story had no origin left, a story about a fox that had existed before the devil himself, before the first angel sang its first note, a fox that slept in the world the way a heartbeat sleeps in a chest, present and foundational and so large that you couldn't see it unless you knew how to look. If it ever wakes up, his mother had said, in the story's version of his memory, every creature that walks or crawls or flies will know. Not because it announces itself. Because something in everything alive will simply turn toward it, the way a compass turns north, and for a moment nothing in the whole world will feel lost. Crowley had been 11 years old and had dismissed it as a drunk woman's folk tale. He was several hundred years old now and standing in his penthouse with a third report burning in his hand and his entire operational nervous system telling him that something he'd spent centuries classifying as mythology had just walked into his territory and sat down on top of a vending machine in Kansas. He told his second-in-command to get the car. He told her to find the Macallan 1926. He told her, most importantly, not to follow him. The drive took longer than flying would have, but Crowley had always believed that the manner of an approach communicated more than the words that followed it, and arriving in a car, his own car, without entourage, without the theater of hellfire and shadow that lesser demons used because they had nothing else, communicated exactly what he intended it to, that he was here as a peer, or as close to a peer as the vast differential between them allowed him to pretend. He tracked the Impala through Hell's surveillance network, which was frankly better than Heaven's and considerably better organized than the American government's, and caught up with it at a rest stop outside of Springfield, Missouri, where it had pulled over for what appeared to be a fuel and snack acquisition. He parked 50 meters back, killed the engine, and sat for a moment looking at the back of Dean Winchester's ridiculous car. He could feel it from here. Not power, exactly. Power was a thing Crowley could quantify, could measure against the scales he'd developed over centuries of political navigation. What he felt was older than power, prior to it, the way that gravity is prior to the objects it acts on. It was the feeling he'd had once, decades ago, standing at the edge of a ley line convergence that had been active since before recorded history, when the ground had hummed under his feet with something that wasn't energy and wasn't presence and wasn't meaning but was somehow all three at once. The feeling that the world had a floor, and you were standing close enough to it to feel it. He got out of the car. He straightened his jacket. He picked up the bottle from the passenger seat, the Macallan, wrapped in cloth because it deserved to be, and he walked toward the rest stop with his hands visible and his pace measured and his face arranged into the expression he reserved for the rare occasions when he was the least powerful thing in the room and intended to behave accordingly. Dean saw him first, because Dean always saw threats first, and Crowley had been categorized as a threat for long enough that the categorization was reflexive. He straightened away from the Impala's hood and his hand went to his jacket with the automatic motion of someone checking their weapon was still there, and his face went through surprise, irritation, and calculation in about half a second. Crowley. Winchester. Crowley kept walking. His eyes were on the rest stop's picnic area, where Sam was at the table again and Castiel was standing with his hands in his coat pockets, watching Crowley's approach with the level, unsettling attention of an entity that had decided it wasn't going to react until it had more information. Good instinct, for an angel. Before you say anything, I have a lot to say. Before you say any of it, I want to be absolutely clear that I am not here with an agenda, I have not brought backup, and Crowley stopped walking when he was 5 meters from Dean and let his eyes find what he'd been tracking from 50 meters back. Naruto was leaning against the side of the rest stop building, arms crossed, watching Crowley with an expression of complete, unhurried attention. He looked like a young man in an orange jacket. He looked like someone who'd been waiting for this exact moment with the patient certainty of someone who'd already seen how it ended. Crowley looked at him for 3 seconds. Then Crowley did something he had not done in front of a Winchester since the first year of their working relationship, when they'd been leveraging each other out of mutual necessity and before he'd had the wherewithal to stop performing anything in front of them. He stopped performing. The King of Hell mask, wry, controlled, always one step ahead, always with the quip prepared, didn't fall off so much as it became briefly irrelevant, the way a very good coat becomes irrelevant when you step into a room that's genuinely warm. Underneath it was something older and more honest, and what that thing did, when it looked at Naruto, was recognize. He inclined his head. Deep, precise, the kind of bow that cost something from someone who never willingly gave anything away. Not prostration. Crowley had too much of himself left to prostrate, but a bow that communicated, without ambiguity, that he understood exactly what he was standing in front of and had chosen to come here willingly and without pretense. Well, Naruto said, after a moment. That's unexpected. I have occasionally surprised people, Crowley said. He straightened and held out the bottle. Macallan 1926. I've been saving it for an occasion that deserved it. Naruto looked at the bottle. Something crossed his face, warm, genuine, slightly disbelieving in an amused way. You brought me a drink. You've been asleep for 3,000 years. It seemed rude not to welcome you back. He paused. I'm Crowley. I know who you are. Naruto took the bottle, turned it in his hands, looked at the label. King of Hell. Originally a deal-making crossroads demon. Originally before that, a human. He looked up. Originally before that, a boy in Scotland who deserved considerably better than what he got. Crowley's expression didn't change. A lot of work went into not changing it. How long have you been tracking us? Dean asked, because Dean was Dean and had decided to set aside his confusion about Crowley's bow in favor of the more immediately actionable problem. Since Kansas, Crowley said, without looking away from Naruto. I have monitoring systems on the ley lines. Standard procedure. Standard hell procedure, Dean said. Do you want me to pretend I don't run a kingdom? Crowley reached into his jacket pocket and removed a flask, personal stock, not a gift, and unscrewed it. I'm not here as an enemy, Winchester. I'm here because this, He gestured, a small and precise gesture that managed to indicate not just Naruto but the whole gravitational situation around him, is significantly above the operational ceiling of whatever anyone else has going on right now, and if there's a game being played at this level, I intend to know about it. Not a game, Naruto said. He'd pocketed the Macallan with the easy comfort of someone who'd received gifts before and knew how to carry them. But you're right that there's something going on. He looked at Crowley with the same full, reading look he'd given Sam earlier, and Crowley had the unusual experience of feeling genuinely examined rather than categorized. You felt the Arkansas activation. Every demon in North America felt it. Crowley took a sip from his flask. It smelled like old architecture. Like something foundational being used as a tuning fork. Good description. Naruto nodded, and Crowley felt, absurdly, the particular small warmth of having said the right thing to someone whose opinion you decided mattered. Someone activated a resonance point using partial source texts. They're testing propagation, seeing how far the signal travels and what it excites. What does it excite? Sam asked from the picnic table. Things that are key to old architecture. Ley lines, obviously. Angels. Naruto glanced at Castiel, who gave a small nod confirming that yes, it had affected his grace. Demons with long enough memory. He looked at Crowley. The older the demon, the stronger the response. The ones from the first centuries were, Crowley paused, unsettled would be the polite version. One of my older field operatives actually went dormant. Just stopped. Sat down in the middle of a Missouri cornfield and wouldn't move. He took another sip. I had to send someone to retrieve him. Dormant, Naruto said, and the word had a weight to it that suggested he recognized it very specifically. He didn't go dormant. He went reverent. There's a difference. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Who's doing this? Dean asked. He'd moved closer during the conversation, drawn in by the pull of information, his arms uncrossed now, a signal Castiel had learned meant Dean was past threat assessment and into problem-solving mode. Grigori, Castiel said. He and Naruto had spoken about this in the car and he delivered the word with the tone of someone confirming a diagnosis. Watchers who fell before Lucifer's rebellion. If they're using partial source texts, they've been collecting pieces, Sam finished. He'd come off the picnic table, laptop under his arm. For how long? Long time, Naruto said. They've been patient. Patient in the way only something immortal with a long project can be patient. He looked south again, the same look from the cornfield, from the car, precise and sustained. This one in particular has been at it since before the apocalypse. The apocalypse was actually useful to him, all the celestial noise covered the collection work. You know who it is, Crowley said. It wasn't a question. I know what it is, Naruto said. Still working on the full picture. He looked at Crowley with a directness that made most things want to look away. Crowley didn't. He met it, held it, and felt what it cost him to do so, not pain, but the specific effort of maintaining eye contact with something that had been watching since before Crowley's concept of time had existed. What do you want out of this? Survival, Crowley said immediately, because honesty was a resource he deployed strategically and this was the exact right moment for it. And information. And if possible, to be on the correct side of whatever is about to happen. You could just leave. I could. Crowley straightened his jacket again. But I find myself in the unusual position of having opinions about the outcome, which suggests that simple self-preservation is not the full accounting of my interest. He looked at Naruto without flinching. Something has been destabilizing the foundational architecture that everything, including hell, runs on. That's not in my interest, regardless of anything else. Naruto watched him for a moment with those eyes that were sometimes gold and sometimes blue and occasionally, when the light shifted, both. Then he smiled. Not the bright, reflexive grin he'd deployed for the Winchesters, but something more considered, more specific, the smile of someone who had just decided something. "Okay," Naruto said. "Okay?" Dean repeated. "He stays." Naruto looked at Dean. "He's useful and he means what he says, which is rarer than the power he brings." He looked back at Crowley. "But if you run a play on your own without telling us, I will be very specific about the consequences." "I wouldn't dare," Crowley said, and meant it in a way he almost never meant things. "Good." Naruto pushed off the wall. "Now. Arkansas. How fast can you get information out of the area? I need to know what was at the center of the activation, the physical location. There'll be a structure, or what's left of one. Old. Possibly pre-colonial." Crowley already had his phone out. He had operatives in Arkansas, he had operatives everywhere. This was the benefit of running an organization that had been building infrastructure for 2,000 years, and within 30 seconds he was texting a field commander with specific coordinates derived from the ley line data. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. "I'll give you 15, Naruto said, and walked back toward the Impala. Dean fell into step beside Crowley, which was the conversational equivalent of a very specific kind of question. Crowley answered it before Dean asked it. "You want to know about the bow?" Crowley said. "Obviously. My mother told me a story when I was a child. About something that existed before everything else. I spent several centuries dismissing it as the folklore of a woman I had no interest in taking seriously." Crowley looked at the back of Naruto's head, the sun-gold hair, the easy walk, the way he moved like someone who had never once in his existence had to make room for anything. "It turns out she was right, and I find that I'm making peace with that faster than I'd expected." Dean was quiet for a moment. "You're scared of him?" "No," Crowley said, and it was the truth. "I'm oriented toward him. Which is different. Fear implies a threat. This is more like," he searched for the word, which was an unusual experience for someone with Crowley's vocabulary, like standing in the correct place for the first time in a very long time. "Which is alarming in a completely different way than fear." Dean looked at him. Then looked ahead at Naruto, who had stopped beside the Impala and was tilting his face up to the late afternoon sky with that same unself-conscious ease he'd had in the cornfield. "Yeah," Dean said quietly. "I know what you mean." Crowley's phone buzzed. He read the message. "Read it again." "Well," he said. "What?" "The location in Arkansas, the center of the activation." He showed Dean the screen. "It's not a structure. Or it was, once, but it's been underground for approximately 1,200 years." He paused. "My operative says the ground above it is marked with a symbol. Ancient. Predating every major religious iconography system I have on record." He looked up. "He says it looks like a spiral inside a circle with 9 lines radiating outward." Dean stared at him. "9. 9, Crowley confirmed. They both looked at Naruto. Naruto had his eyes closed, face still tilted up, looking for all the world like someone simply enjoying the sun. But his hands, at his sides, had changed, just slightly, just enough to notice if you were watching closely. His fingers had spread, and from the space between them, just barely visible in the afternoon light, ran thin threads of gold that weren't there and then were and then weren't again, threading into the air and into the ground and into everything between, like the working roots of something immeasurably deep. "He knows," Sam said from beside Crowley's elbow, materializing with the silent efficiency he'd developed from years of being the younger Winchester. Sam's eyes were on the threads of gold. "He knew before we got the report. He said he was still working on the full picture," Castiel said, arriving from the other side with equal silence. "Maybe," Sam said. "Or maybe he was being polite." Naruto opened his eyes and dropped his face from the sky and the gold threads were gone as if they'd never been. He looked at all of them, Dean and Sam and Castiel and Crowley, standing in a loose cluster behind him, with the expression of someone surveying something they find genuinely, deeply interesting. I know what's in Arkansas, he said. And I know who put it there. He looked south. His name is Malphas. He's a Grigori, old order, first generation. He was present at the original formation of the ley line architecture. He knows the system better than anyone alive except me. He paused. He's been building something using fragments of my source texts and the residual signature of my power that's been leaking into the ley lines while I was sleeping. He's using it as, he turned back, as a skeleton key. He thinks if he builds a complete enough resonance model of what I am, he can access the foundational architecture directly. Can he? Sam asked. No, Naruto said simply. But he doesn't know that yet, and the process of him trying will do a lot of damage. He looked at Crowley. The Arkansas site, it's a resonance anchor. Part of a larger array. You need to find the others. There'll be more of them, old sites, pre-colonial, each one keyed to a fragment of the source text. How many anchors? Crowley asked. Naruto looked at him. How many texts did Malphas collect? Crowley ran the calculation. It wasn't a fast calculation. That's a very large number of anchors. Yes. That's been, Crowley stopped. A very long project, Naruto said. I told you he was patient. He moved to the driver's side of the Impala and knocked on the roof. Dean. Drive. I'm driving, Dean said immediately, moving with the automatic response of someone who never needed to be asked to get behind his own wheel. Arkansas? Sam asked. Arkansas, Naruto confirmed. I'll follow in my car, Crowley said. Try to keep up, Dean said, and started the engine, and the Impala's sound rolled across the rest stop parking lot with the deep authority of something that had been a lot of places and was not done yet. Crowley walked back to his car. He got in. He sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the back of the Impala as it pulled toward the exit, and he thought about his mother's story, and about dormant demons, and about the spiral symbol with 9 radiating lines that his operative had described in a field in Arkansas. Then he thought about Malphas. He knew the name. Every demon over a certain age knew the name, the way you knew the names of things that had been around before your particular organization had formed and that had never quite signed on to any existing power structure. Malphas had been a problem in the abstract for longer than hell had been a functioning kingdom, a problem in the way that very old, very intelligent things with very long projects were always problems, not immediately threatening, but occupying a category of concern that the hierarchy kept filing under later and then finding, occasionally, that later had arrived. It appeared later had arrived. Crowley started the engine. He was 3 miles behind the Impala when Gabriel appeared in his passenger seat, because of course he did, because the universe had a specific and well-documented sense of humor and Crowley's life was its primary subject. Crowley. Gabriel said, with the energy of someone who had been waiting a very long time to say exactly that with exactly that intonation. He was wearing a different outfit than the last time Crowley had seen him, earth tones, very casual, the look of someone who had been passing as human so long they'd started to enjoy it. He had a candy bar in his hand. He was already eating it. Long time. You look tired. I'm always tired. Why are you in my car, Gabriel? Because I heard. Gabriel's voice changed. Stripped of the showmanship it became something more honest, and what was honest about it was that it was careful in the way that careful means the thing I'm being careful about matters to me. I heard the spike. I felt the Arkansas activation. He looked out the windshield at the road. And I felt the thing that caused the spike in Kansas. He was quiet for a moment, which was unusual enough for Gabriel that it functioned as its own statement. He's really awake. He's in the car ahead of us eating your brother's beef jerky, Crowley confirmed. Gabriel was quiet for another moment. How is he? The question landed with more weight than its 4 words deserved. Crowley glanced at him. Gabriel was still looking at the windshield, candy bar forgotten in his hand, and his face had the expression that archangels' faces had when they were feeling something they'd spent a very long time not feeling. "He seems well," Crowley said, which was the understatement of 3,000 years. "He seems, himself." "Whatever that means." "It means a lot," Gabriel said. "Trust me." "When did you meet him?" "Long time ago. Before I left heaven." Before the whole, Gabriel gestured with the candy bar, family drama situation. He finally looked away from the windshield. "He was the reason I ran, actually. Not because of anything he did. Because of what I saw when I looked at him and compared it to what we were doing up there." He paused. Hard to justify an apocalypse when you've spent time around something that was old before the concept of apocalypse existed and has never once thought it was a good idea. Crowley processed this. "You've been running from heaven for millennia because a fox deity gave you a crisis of conscience. When you say it like that, it sounds accurate." Gabriel made a face that confirmed accuracy. "Look, he's not," he stopped, started again. "He's not what the texts say. The texts make him sound like a force of nature, which, yes, technically, but that's not the whole story. Gabriel searched for the word the same way Crowley had searched for one in the parking lot. "He's the most genuinely present thing I've ever been around. Like everything else in creation is slightly distracted, always thinking about the past or the future or the doctrine or the politics, and he's just there. Entirely there. Every moment." Crowley thought about the gold threads between Naruto's fingers, running into the earth and air. "Yes," he said. "I noticed that. Does he know about Malphas?" "He's known since before we arrived at the rest stop." Gabriel nodded slowly. "Then he's going to want to see the Arkansas site himself. He'll want to read the anchor." He sat back in the seat. "Don't let the Winchesters go in first. Malphas will have left a welcome mat." "What kind of welcome mat?" "The kind that kills people who aren't the fox." Gabriel finally took another bite of his candy bar, and the return to eating it was itself a kind of answer. The conversation had reached the point where Gabriel had said what he needed to say and was returning to the comfortable armor of his own performance. "So, you and me riding together to back up two humans, a fallen angel, and the primordial fox deity against a rogue Grigori who's been building a doomsday array for 12 centuries. That appears to be the situation, yes." Gabriel looked at him. "You brought him a drink." "I brought him a very good drink." "The Macallan? 25-year. Crowley." A pause. "That's genuinely sweet. Tell anyone and I will make your existence miserable." "I'll tell everyone," Gabriel said cheerfully, and finished his candy bar, and put his feet up on Crowley's dashboard, and Crowley let him because they were driving towards something very old and very serious, and there were worse ways to arrive at it than in a warm car with someone who had once been brave enough to leave heaven for the right reasons. The highway ran south. The sky went dark in the clean, sudden way it did in late autumn, stars coming out fast and sharp, and the two cars moved through it together, one ahead and one behind, and between them and what waited in Arkansas the night had the quality that night sometimes had, charged, aware, the particular texture of a story turning over from its opening to something more serious. In the Impala, Naruto had his window down. The wind moved through his hair and across his face, and he had his eyes open and he was looking at the stars with an expression that nobody in the car could see from their angles, but if they could have, it would not have been the expression of someone going to investigate a threat. It would have been the expression of someone who had been asleep for 3,000 years, and had found, in the span of a single day, something worth being awake for. Several things, in fact. 4 of them, currently, within arm's reach. He let the wind run through his fingers and smiled at the stars and didn't say anything, and the Impala's engine sang underneath him like something that was very glad to be running. Chapter 4, Foxfire and Highway Dust. The thing about Arkansas at 2 in the morning was that it didn't apologize for itself. No ambient glow from city lights, no interstate noise, just the Ozark Hills going dark and specific in the way that old land does at night, folded and private, holding whatever it held with the patience of geology. The road they were on had stopped being a county road about 6 miles back and become something more like a suggestion, 2 tracks pressed into red clay through second-growth pine, and the Impala was taking it at a pace that suggested Dean's relationship with his car's suspension was deeply personal. "There is a road," Dean said to no one in particular, because there was manifestly not a road. "There's a direction," Naruto said from the back seat. "Those are different things. You've been driving in the right direction for 40 minutes. The direction's not the problem." Naruto was leaning forward with his arms folded across the back of Dean's seat, looking through the windshield with the focused ease of something that navigated by methods considerably older than GPS. "Left here." "There's no left here." "There will be." There was. 20 meters ahead, barely visible between 2 pines that had grown into each other's space over what looked like 50 years of mutual accommodation, a gap opened up, not a road, but enough of a gap for the Impala if Dean committed to it without thinking too hard, which Dean did, grimacing as branches scraped the roof. "If she gets scratched," Dean started. "She won't," Naruto said, and she didn't. The branches that should have dragged across the paint lifted slightly as the car passed under them, a movement that had nothing to do with wind, and Dean chose not to comment on it. "How are you doing that?" Sam asked. "Asking nicely," Naruto said. Sam wrote something in his journal. Crowley's car was visible in the rearview mirror, following at a distance that suggested the rental had significantly less clearance than the Impala, and Crowley had significantly more concern about his vehicle than he'd ever admit. Gabriel had reportedly relocated to Crowley's back seat at some point during the drive, which Crowley had texted about with the energy of a man who was aggressively not complaining. "Found a passenger. Uninvited. Not the first time tonight I've been surprised by things I thought were myths." Dean had texted back, "Welcome to my whole life." They broke through the tree line into a clearing that the land had clearly been keeping private. It was roughly circular, maybe 200 feet across, and the grass was wrong, not dead, not burned, but flattened in a pattern that moved outward from the center in 9 distinct channels, like ripples from a stone dropped in water, except stone still and permanent, pressed into the earth by something that had done it once and done it thoroughly. The trees at the clearing's edge were old. Older than the second-growth pine they'd driven through, these were hardwoods, white oak and hickory, with the diameter of things that had been here before Europeans had known this continent existed. At the center of the clearing, barely visible until Dean cut the headlights and let their eyes adjust, was a stone. Not a monolith, nothing dramatic. Just a stone about 4 feet tall, irregular, dark with moisture and age, with a symbol carved into its face that was exactly as Crowley's operative had described, a spiral inside a circle, 9 lines radiating outward. Even from this distance it did something to the air around it, not a shimmer, nothing visible, just a quality of wrongness that registered at the level below thought, the level where prey animals make good decisions. Dean cut the engine. Crowley's car stopped at the tree line behind them. Nobody got out for a moment. "Gabriel said not to let us go in first," Sam said. "Smart," Naruto said, and got out of the car. Dean and Sam exchanged a look and got out after him. The clearing's air was different, cooler than it should have been for Arkansas in autumn, and carrying a smell that Crowley, walking up from his car, identified immediately because he'd filed it in his threat assessment categories decades ago, ozone and iron, and something underneath both of those that had no chemical name, the smell of active old work. Gabriel was at Crowley's elbow, the showmanship completely absent, watching Naruto move toward the stone with an expression that Crowley was filing under reverent without any of the self-consciousness the word usually carried. Naruto walked to within 10 feet of the stone and stopped. He looked at it. The stone looked back, or did something that functioned like looking back, a pressure, a recognition, the specific attention of something that had been keyed to respond to exactly what had just walked up to it. The 9 carved lines on its face began to glow. Not dramatically, a dull amber light, like embers remembering fire, pulsing at a frequency that sat uncomfortably close to a heartbeat. "Malphas carved this," Naruto said. Not loudly. Conversationally, almost, the way you read a signature on a painting. But the symbol he carved is older than him. He copied it from the source texts. He crouched down to eye level with the stone, looking at the carving from 2 inches away. He got most of it right. The spiral proportion is off by about 4 degrees. The 9th line is 2 millimeters short. He stood back up. Enough to make it functional. Not enough to make it accurate. What does accurate look like? Sam asked. He'd stopped at the clearing's edge with his journal out and was writing by the faint amber glow. Naruto looked at his own right hand. Something like this, he said, and touched 2 fingers to the back of his hand, and for a moment, brief and startling and completely quiet, the same symbol appeared there in gold. Not carved. Not drawn. Inherent, the way grain is inherent in wood, the way the spiral of a shell is not something added to the shell but something the shell has always been. Then it was gone and his hand was just his hand. That's what he's trying to copy, Naruto continued, straightening. He's been collecting fragments of the source texts, each fragment describes a different aspect of the original pattern. The architecture of what I am. He looked at the stone. Each anchor activates when a new fragment is integrated. This one went live about 18 hours ago. Which means he found a new piece. How many fragments are there? Castiel asked. He'd come forward while Naruto spoke, drawn in by the gravity of it, and was standing 3 feet to Naruto's left with his hands loose at his sides. 9, Naruto said. Nobody said anything. 9 fragments, Crowley said, finally. Corresponding to, yes, Naruto said simply. He turned away from the stone and walked back toward the group, and behind him the amber glow faded as if it had only needed his attention to sustain itself. He has at least 1 anchor active. Probably more, this might not be the first activation. The others might have gone up quietly enough that the spike didn't register at human detectable levels. He looked at Castiel. How many would register with angelic monitoring? Anything above a class 4 resonance. Below that, so we might have missed the first few. Naruto nodded. He didn't look troubled by this. He looked the way a chess player looks when they confirm a suspicion about their opponent's strategy, not pleased, exactly, but engaged, the particular engagement of someone whose mind is already several moves ahead. Okay. We need to map the array. Find the other anchors, figure out the pattern, determine where the final one is meant to go. And what happens when the final one activates? Dean asked. Naruto looked at him. He tries to access the foundational architecture using a resonance model built from 9 fragments of the original source pattern. He tries to essentially reach into the world's operating system through a skeleton key built from a copy of me. And what happens to the world if he tries that? Sam asked. His pen was still moving. Depends on how precise his copy is. Naruto's voice was even, practical. An imprecise copy in an imprecise array does broad structural damage. Ley lines, celestial communications, the basic physics of how this plane of reality holds itself together. He looked around the clearing. Think of it like trying to hotwire a car with the wrong key. You don't start the car, you fry the ignition. Except the car is the world. The metaphor landed with the weight it deserved. Right, Dean said. Let's not let him do that. That's the plan, Naruto agreed pleasantly. He turned to Crowley. Your network, how quickly can it locate pre-colonial sacred sites in North America? Old ones, underground or obscured, anomalous ley line readings? Faster than any other network you have access to, Crowley said, which was true and not a boast. Give me 6 hours. You have 4. Naruto looked at Gabriel. You were in heaven when the Grigori fell. You know Malphas. Gabriel's jaw tightened slightly. Met him. Wouldn't use the word no. What do you remember about him? Brilliant, Gabriel said, without hesitation. Patient. The kind of patient that's actually a form of anger, like he'd been furious about something for so long that the fury had composted into methodology. He paused. He never wanted to rule. That was always the thing that made him more dangerous than the ones who wanted a throne. He just wanted to. Gabriel stopped. To understand, Naruto said quietly. Gabriel looked at him. Yeah. I know. Naruto was quiet for a moment, and in that moment the clearing was very still and the old oaks at the edge were very present and the amber glow on the stone had fully faded and left something that was almost a kind of sorrow in the air. Almost. I know what he wanted. I knew it then too. Nobody asked what he meant by then. The weight of the word didn't invite the question. Okay, Dean said, because Dean's primary skill in the face of ancient, sorrowful silences was productive redirection. It's 2 a.m. Crowley, you're on research. Gabriel, he looked at Gabriel with the expression of someone who still hadn't fully processed Gabriel being there but was choosing functionality over philosophy. You know anything else about Malphasa's operational patterns? Where he'd set up anchors? He'd go for convergence points, Gabriel said, slipping back into something more businesslike with the ease of long practice. Places where multiple ley lines cross under old human sacred sites. He always understood that human reverence amplifies old architecture. Prayer isn't just psychological, it's structural. Centuries of worship at a site does something to the resonance. He looked at Sam. You'd want to look at sites that had continuous use from pre-Columbian through colonial periods. Conversion sites, places where indigenous sacred locations were built over with churches or later structures. Sam's pen was moving fast. There are hundreds of those sites. He wouldn't need hundreds. He needs 8 more anchors. Gabriel counted on his fingers. 9 total, 1 per fragment, arranged in a specific geometric relationship to each other. That geometry is going to be the limiting factor. Not every sacred site will fit the pattern. What's the pattern? Sam asked. Gabriel and Castiel looked at each other with the specific look of 2 beings who had both independently arrived at the same uncomfortable answer. The Enochian pattern of original construction, Castiel said. The geometric template used when the ley lines were first laid. Which I'd find where? Sam asked. The bunker, Castiel said. The men of letters had fragmentary records. Some of it cross-referenced with Enochian architectural texts. Then we need to get back to the bunker. Sam was already moving toward the car. If I can map the original construction geometry and overlay it with Crowley's site data, we can predict the array, Dean finished. He was already pulling his keys. He stopped, looked at Naruto. You knew all this before tonight, didn't you? Naruto met his eyes. Most of it. Why didn't you just tell us? Because you needed to see it, Naruto said simply. Information you're given sits differently than information you find. You needed to find this. He gestured at the stone, the clearing, the flattened grass in its 9-channel pattern. Now it's real to you in a different way. Now you'll work like it's real. Dean stared at him for a long moment with an expression that was working through several things at once: irritation at being managed, recognition that the management had been correct, and something underneath both of those that was more complicated and more honest. That's either very wise or very annoying. Usually both, Naruto said, walking past him toward the car. The drive back to the interstate was quieter. Crowley peeled off at the first gas station to start making calls, with Gabriel in tow in a passenger seat he'd apparently decided was his now. Sam was on his laptop, connected to the bunker's remote access system, pulling files with the urgency of someone who'd found the corner piece of a very large and very important puzzle. Castiel was in the back seat, which he shared with Naruto, and the quiet between them had the quality it had developed in the car earlier: companionable, specific, the quiet of 2 things that didn't need to fill space. Dean had the radio on low. The first song that came on was something old and country and deeply out of character for the Impala's usual repertoire, but Dean didn't change it. It had a slide guitar that sat well against the highway noise and the dark outside, and nobody complained. "Can I ask you something?" Dean said, after about 20 miles of this. "Yeah," Naruto said. "The vessel." Dean kept his eyes on the road. You look like a person. You've been looking like a person this whole time. Is that," he paused, looking for the right question in the pile of questions he had. "Is that what you actually are? Or is it, it's what I chose," Naruto said. "Long time ago. I could have existed as something else. Something less specific. But I liked having a shape that let me sit in cars and eat ramen and argue about music." "We haven't argued about music yet," Dean said. "Give it 10 minutes, Naruto said." Dean glanced in the mirror. Naruto was completely serious. "What kind of music do you like?" "Older stuff," Naruto said. "Things with a lot of feeling and not a lot of cleverness. Music that doesn't know how good it is." He paused. "Not the Beatles. What's wrong with, they knew they were good. It changes the sound." He shrugged. "Give me something that was written because someone had to write it, not because they wanted you to know they could. Hank Williams. Early blues. Anything with a voice that sounds like it costs the singer something." Dean processed this. "Hank Williams," he said. "Specifically, I'm so lonesome I could cry." That song was written by a man who understood that loneliness was not a feeling but a geography. Sam had stopped typing. Dean started. "Very specific for someone who's been asleep for 3,000 years? "A little, yeah. I wasn't entirely asleep." Naruto leaned back. "I told you, like being half aware on a Sunday. You don't remember everything you heard but some of it gets in anyway." He was quiet for a moment. "I heard a lot of music. Through the ground, through the ley lines, through the vibration of it. Every song that was played somewhere near an old site. Blues from the Delta. Coal miners' songs. Lullabies." A pause. "I heard a lot of lullabies." The slide guitar on the radio moved through its phrase and resolved. "You liked it," Sam said. Not a question. "The music?" "Being half aware." "The hearing?" Sam turned around in the seat. "You could have woken up earlier." Naruto looked at him for a moment with those eyes that contained more than any specific conversation, and then he smiled, not the bright grin and not the warm quiet smile but something in between, something that was, of all the expressions he'd shown them in the past 24 hours, the most private. "Yeah," he said. "I could have." "Why didn't you?" "Because the world wasn't ready for me to be useful yet," he said. "And I don't wake up to be useless. I've done useless. It gets old." "What makes now different?" Dean asked. Naruto's eyes came to the rearview mirror and met Dean's. "You do," he said. "The three of you. What you've been doing, what you've been carrying." He looked away, out the window. "The old texts have a concept, the ones who hold the shape. The beings, in any era, whose choices keep the fundamental structure of things from collapsing. You've been doing that for years without knowing that's what it was." He paused. I noticed it from a long way down." The car was quiet. Not uncomfortably, the kind of quiet that a true thing drops into the air when it lands. Dean's hands on the wheel were steady but his jaw had tightened in the specific way it did when something hit him that he wasn't prepared to say anything about yet. Sam was not writing. He was looking out the window with the expression he wore when information was reorganizing his entire model of something. Castiel, in the back seat, said nothing. But the hand he had resting on the seat between himself and Naruto had moved, fractionally, closer. They stopped for gas outside of Joplin because the Impala had opinions about not running on empty, and Dean filled the tank while Sam went inside for coffee and snacks with the specific exhausted focus of someone who had been awake for 22 hours and intended to be awake for several more. The gas station was the kind that had been there since before the interstate, the kind with a hand-painted sign and a single pump and a cat asleep on the counter inside that had clearly been the manager for years. Naruto stood beside the pump and looked at the cat through the glass. The cat opened one eye. Then it got up. Slowly, with great dignity, the way old cats do things, and walked to the edge of the counter and sat down and looked at Naruto through the glass with the expression of an animal that had just recognized something and was deciding how to respond. Then it bowed its head. A single, deliberate inclination, chin tucking toward chest, like a very small and very dignified nod. Naruto bowed back. Same depth, same deliberateness. The cat resumed its position on the counter. Dean had watched all of this over the roof of the car. He said nothing. He finished pumping the gas. He put the cap back on. The cat, he said finally. Old animals know, Naruto said, walking toward the door. Doesn't matter what shape I'm in. Doesn't matter how long I've been asleep. Something in the old ones just, he pushed the door open, knows. Dean stood beside his car for a moment looking at the gas station, at the cat that had returned to its side, at the ordinary desolate beauty of a Missouri gas station at 3 in the morning, and felt the particular sensation that had been accumulating for the past 24 hours, the sensation of his entire category of experience being quietly, completely rewritten. He went inside. Sam had bought 4 coffees and an amount of beef jerky that suggested he was stress provisioning, and was telling the bored teenager behind the counter something about the local history of the Ozarks that the teenager was pretending not to find interesting, which meant he absolutely found it interesting. Naruto was looking at the magazine rack with genuine curiosity, pulling out a hunting magazine, putting it back, selecting a worn paperback from a dusty spinner rack near the door that had apparently been there long enough to belong to the gas station's permanent collection. He held it up for Dean to see. Blood Meridian, Cormac McCarthy. The spine was cracked, the pages browning at the edges. Good? Dean asked. I haven't read it, Naruto said. But the man who wrote it understood violence the way old things understand violence. Not as aberration. As weather. He turned it over, read the back. That's rare. You read a lot. I've been hearing stories for 30,000 years. He put the book in his jacket pocket without paying for it, and the teenager behind the counter looked up, and Naruto met his eyes, and the teenager looked back down and didn't say anything. Not from intimidation, from the same thing the cat had done, the same thing Gerald Hatch's legs had done at the cornfield. Something that wasn't exactly a choice. Stories are how the world explains itself to itself. I was present for a lot of them. He walked back to the door. Mostly I find I prefer the ones where people persist against things that should have beaten them. Modest, Dean said. Accurate. The door swung shut behind him. Sam appeared at Dean's elbow. He just took that book. I know. The kid didn't say anything. I know. Dean. Sam. Dean took his coffee. I know. He looked at the door. Get in the car. They were back on the interstate by 3:30, Joplin falling behind them, the Kansas border coming up, and the conversation had settled into the rhythms of a long drive, Sam reading from his laptop, Castiel occasionally offering information from the angelic archive with the careful precision of someone citing sources, Naruto reading his stolen book with the focused quiet of someone who meant it. Dean drove. He was thinking about the ones who hold the shape. He was thinking about the way Naruto had said it, not as a compliment, not as a mythological designation, but as a description of observed behavior. The way you'd say you're good with engines or you know how to read people, noting a quality that existed regardless of whether the person knew about it. He was thinking about what it meant that something older than heaven had noticed. Hey, he said, at mile marker 47. Naruto looked up from the book. Why an orange jacket? Dean asked. Of all the things on the list, this one had somehow become load-bearing. You've been wearing it since Kansas. It's clean, which it shouldn't be. You've been in cornfields and Arkansas clearings and gas stations. It shouldn't be clean. Naruto looked down at the jacket. I like orange, he said. That's not an answer. It's the whole answer. Naruto went back to his book. Some things don't need more context than that, Dean. I like orange. I liked it before orange had a name. I'll like it after orange stops meaning anything to anyone. He turned a page. Some things you just like. Dean looked at the road. Somewhere in him, something that had been braced since Kansas, waiting for the other shoe, for the reveal, for the moment when the thing in his back seat became a problem he couldn't handle, did something unexpected. It relaxed. Not all the way. Not stupidly. Just enough. He turned the radio up slightly, and Hank Williams came out of the speakers with the specific quality of something that had been written because someone had to write it, and in the back seat the entity that had existed before the first angel sang its first note turned another page of a stolen book, and outside the windows the American night unrolled wide and dark and absolutely littered with stars. Chapter 5. The architecture of ruin. The bunker smelled like old paper and engine oil and the specific mustiness of a place that had been many people's home across many decades, and Naruto stood in the main room for a full minute after they arrived, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the ceiling. What? Dean asked, dropping his bag on the table. The men who built this, Naruto said. They knew what they were doing. Not just the construction, the intention. He looked at the walls, the shelves, the artifacts behind glass. They understood that knowledge needed a container with the right architecture. Most people build libraries. These ones built something that thinks. Sam looked up from the table where he'd immediately started laying out files. The men of letters. I watched a few of them work, Naruto said. From a distance. From deep. He moved to the nearest bookshelf and ran a finger along the spines without pulling any of them out. The one who designed this room understood spatial resonance. The shape of this space does something to the quality of thinking done inside it. He looked at Sam. You've noticed that? Sam paused. I do think better in here than anywhere else. Not a coincidence. Naruto pulled his hand back and turned to the table. What do we have? What they had, by 6 in the morning, was considerable. Sam had pulled every file in the bunker that cross-referenced Enochian geometric architecture with North American sacred site documentation, and Castiel had spent 2 hours with the Enochian texts translating with the efficiency of someone reading their native language and the precision of someone who understood the stakes of getting a single character wrong. Gabriel had arrived through a door that hadn't been a door until he opened it, the bathroom, specifically, which Dean objected to on principle, and had contributed 3 pages of handwritten notes from what he described as personal memory of the original construction period, which Sam had received with the expression of a man trying not to show how delighted he was. Crowley had called at 5:30 with 17 candidate sites drawn from Hell's surveillance network, a list that he delivered with the clipped efficiency of someone who had been working continuously since 2 in the morning and wasn't going to mention it. Dean had written them all down. Sam had immediately started cross-referencing. The map that emerged on the bunker table, by the time the coffee had been made and the second round of coffee had been made and the third round was brewing, was not comfortable to look at. 9 sites. A geometric pattern that Castiel confirmed matched the Enochian template of original construction to within a margin of error that was, as he put it, precisely the margin you'd expect from someone working from fragmentary texts rather than primary sources. The pattern covered the continental United States in a shape that had no common name in human geometry but that Gabriel, looking at it, called by an Enochian word that translated roughly as the vessel shape, the geometric relationship between 9 points that, when energized in the correct sequence, created a contained resonance field large enough to encompass the original ley line architecture of the North American continent. The Arkansas site was anchor number 6. He's got 6 active, Sam said, tracing the pattern on the map with a pen that didn't quite touch the paper. Which means he has 6 fragments of the source text. He needs 3 more to complete the array. Where are the remaining 3 sites? Castiel asked. Sam pointed. Oklahoma. Montana. Maine. Oklahoma's the next one, Gabriel said, leaning over the map. He'd been to 3 of the sites on the list in other capacities over the centuries, and his spatial memory was, like all archangel memory, essentially photographic. If he's activating in the sequence the geometric pattern implies, Oklahoma is next. It'll be, he calculated, a site in the Wichita Mountains. There's a convergence point there that's been active since before the first human habitation. The Comanche knew it. Built around it, not on top of it. When? Dean asked. Gabriel looked at Naruto. Naruto was standing at the end of the table, looking at the map with the same focused expression he'd had at the Arkansas clearing, not analytical, exactly, more like listening. Like the map was telling him something that the symbols on it only partially conveyed. He activated Arkansas to draw me out, he said. He wanted to see if I'd come. He wanted to read my response pattern. He looked up. Oklahoma won't wait. He already has what he needs for it. He was waiting to see if I woke up before he committed to the final 3. And now he knows you're awake, Dean said. Now he knows I'm awake, Naruto confirmed. Which means he accelerates. Oklahoma in the next 12 hours, probably. Montana and Maine after that in quick succession. He straightened. He's not afraid of me coming. He wants me there for the final activation. The whole point of the array is to run it while I'm present. My proximity amplifies the resonance. The room was quiet with the specific quality of a room in which everyone has just understood something they'd have preferred not to understand. He needs you there, Sam said slowly. Like, physically present at the final anchor. Or close enough that my presence propagates through the ley lines to the array. Naruto's voice was level. Within a few hundred miles. So he activates the last anchor and then what? He tries to, what? Download you? Dean's expression made clear his feelings about this. He tries to read the complete pattern through the array, Naruto said. If the array is precise enough, it creates a resonance model of the original architecture. A working copy of the foundational source. He paused. And then he tries to use that to access the layer of reality that the ley lines are built on top of. Can he? Sam asked. Even with the array complete? No, Naruto said. But the trying will be spectacular and destructive, and I'd rather not let him find out empirically. Right, Dean said. Oklahoma. We drive tonight. I need 2 hours of sleep first, Sam said, in the tone of a man making a declaration rather than a request. 4 hours, Naruto said. Sam blinked. I said 2. You need 4. You've been up for 26 hours and you do your best thinking after 4 hours of real sleep, not 2 hours of anxious half-sleep. Naruto looked at him with the matter-of-fact care of something that had been watching Sam Winchester for long enough to have opinions about his sleep hygiene. Dean, same. 4 hours. Dean opened his mouth. 4 hours, Naruto said, and Dean closed his mouth, and there was a moment where the room recalibrated around the simple fact that the thing at the end of the table had said 4 hours with a tone that made argument feel genuinely silly. What about you? Dean asked. I don't sleep the way you do, Naruto said. I'll keep working. And me? Castiel asked. You and Gabriel keep going on the source text fragments. I want to know what Malphas has and what order he collected them in. The order matters. It tells us which aspect of the architecture he thinks is most foundational, which tells us what he plans to access first. Gabriel sat down across from Castiel at the table and pulled a stack of files toward himself with the resigned energy of someone who had been avoiding homework for millennia and was finally sitting down to do it. You know, he said to Castiel, we could have just talked to each other centuries ago. Saved a lot of paperwork. Castiel looked at him. You were hiding. I was traveling, Gabriel said. There's a difference. You told a woman in 2008 that your name was Loki. I have range. Gabriel opened the first file. Don't make it weird. Dean pointed at Sam, jerked his head toward the sleeping quarters. Sam went without further argument, which was itself a measure of how tired he was. Dean paused at the door to the main room and looked back at Naruto, who had taken Sam's seat and was pulling the map toward himself and looking at it again with that listening quality. Hey, Dean said. Naruto looked up. Malphas, Dean said. You knew him. Before. You said I know what he wanted like it was personal. Naruto was quiet for a moment. Not hesitating, weighing. There was a difference in how he carried his pauses, some were processing, some were choosing. This was choosing. He was there when the ley lines were laid, he said at last. He was one of the watchers assigned to the original construction. Brilliant, like Gabriel said. He understood the architecture better than anyone except the ones who designed it. He looked at the map. He used to ask me questions. Endless questions, the way something asks questions when it's hungry for understanding rather than for answers. I liked it. He paused. I liked him. Dean leaned against the doorframe. What happened? He watched for too long, Naruto said simply. That's what watchers do, they watch. But watching without acting, watching without being in what you're watching, changes you. It distances you from things. Makes them abstract. After enough centuries of watching, people become variables. History becomes data. He tapped the map lightly with one finger. He stopped seeing people and started seeing patterns. And patterns don't have the thing in here. The two-finger touched to his chest again, the same gesture from the clearing. Patterns don't hurt when you break them. Dean looked at him for a long moment. You think he can be reached? I think the part of him that asked me questions still exists, Naruto said carefully. I don't know if it's big enough to matter anymore. He looked up at Dean. Go sleep. Right, Dean said, and didn't move for another second, and then went. The bunker settled into the quiet of early morning work. Castiel and Gabriel moved through texts with the efficient industry of two beings who processed information at rates that made the pile of files on the table considerably less intimidating. Naruto studied the map and occasionally wrote on a separate sheet of paper in a script that was not Enochian and not any human language and that glowed faintly gold for the 30 seconds after he wrote each character before fading to ordinary ink. At 7:30, Crowley appeared at the bunker entrance with fresh coffee from somewhere that wasn't the gas station variety they'd been running on, which immediately elevated his standing in the room. The Oklahoma site, he said, setting cups down. I have a team there. Watching only, not engaging, I learned from the Arkansas operative report that proximity does something unpleasant to older demons. He sat down with his own cup. Nothing's moved yet. The site is dormant. It won't be for long, Naruto said, without looking up from the map. Crowley looked at the sheet with the glowing script. What are you writing? A letter. To who? To Malphas. Crowley was quiet for a moment. Is that advisable? Probably not. Naruto finished a character and watched it glow and fade. But he's going to read the ley lines regardless. He knows I'm awake, he knows I'm working. This just makes the communication explicit. He looked up at Crowley. He needs to know I'm coming to Oklahoma. Not because I have to be there, because I want to talk to him before this goes further. And if he doesn't want to talk, then we'll know something important about how much of him is left. Naruto set the pen down. Either way, it's information. Crowley considered this with the expression of someone who has spent long enough in politics to recognize both the intelligence and the risk of the move. You understand that alerting him to your location, he already knows my location, Naruto said. He's been tracking me since I woke up. He picked up one of the coffees Crowley had brought and drank it with the comfortable directness of someone who hadn't had good coffee in a very long time. Where is this from? A place in Lawrence that opens at 5. Naruto looked at the cup. You drove to Lawrence for coffee. I drove through Lawrence, Crowley said. There's a distinction. Thank you, Naruto said, and meant it with a simplicity that made Crowley do the thing he kept doing, which was feeling the particular discomfort of being treated sincerely by something he'd bowed to and meaning both the bow and the discomfort simultaneously. Don't mention it, Crowley said. 4 hours later, Dean came back to the main room looking marginally more human, with Sam behind him looking considerably more dangerous, which was the specific improvement in Sam that 4 hours of sleep reliably produced. He assessed the table, the updated map, Castiel's notes, the sheet of glowing script, in about 10 seconds, poured himself coffee, and said, briefing. It took 40 minutes. Sam spent most of it on his feet, moving between the map and his laptop, connecting what they had to what they needed. His thinking out loud was one of the most efficient information processing experiences Dean had ever witnessed, and he'd been watching Sam think for 30 years. By the end of it, they had a route, a timeline, a contingency for if Malphas activated Oklahoma before they arrived, and a list of things they didn't know that was shorter than the list of things they did, which was the best ratio they'd had since Kansas. The letter, Sam said, looking at the glowing sheet. Cass, can you read it? Castiel looked at the script. No. It's older than Enochian. He looked at Naruto. Much older. It's the language the ley lines were built in, Naruto said. Malphas will be able to read it. He's been decoding fragments of it for centuries. What does it say? Sam asked. Naruto looked at it. It says, I know what you built and I know why you built it. Come and talk to me before you do the thing that can't be undone. 38 years ago you told a woman in New Mexico that the world was worth saving if you could find the right lever. I remember that. The room was quiet. 38 years ago, Gabriel said carefully. He was moving through the American Southwest in the 80s, Naruto said. Still in the observation phase. Still talking to people. He looked at Gabriel. Still asking questions. He talked to people? Castiel said. In the 80s? He had a vessel. He was, less far gone, then. He'd been building the theory but hadn't committed to the architecture yet. There were years, maybe decades, where he could have gone a different way. Naruto rolled the letter into a scroll that was and then wasn't there, gone into the ley line network the way a signal goes into a wire. This is me offering him a different way. One last time. And if he doesn't take it? Dean said. Naruto looked at him. The warmth was still there, it was always there, as far as Dean could tell it was structural rather than situational, but underneath it was the other thing, the thing that had been briefly visible at the rest stop and briefly visible in the clearing, the thing that sat below the warmth the way bedrock sits below topsoil. Then we go to Oklahoma, Naruto said, and I stop him. How? Sam asked. However is necessary, Naruto said, and the simplicity of it closed the question completely. They left the bunker at noon. The drive to Oklahoma was 6 hours in good traffic and they made it in 5 because Dean drove like he had opinions about time and the Impala agreed with all of them. Gabriel rode with Crowley again, apparently having accepted the arrangement as permanent. Castiel sat in the back with Naruto, and about 3 hours in, when Sam had fallen into the light doze of someone who had accepted that car travel was his primary sleeping environment, Castiel said quietly, "You sent the letter knowing he won't respond." Naruto looked at him. "Probably won't." "Then why?" "Because I'll know I tried." He looked out the window. The Oklahoma landscape was coming up now, the plains giving way to the rolling red clay hills of the central part of the state, scrub oak and cedar, the particular quality of light that flat land and big sky produce together. He was my friend. A long time ago, before he stopped being able to have friends. You don't get a lot of those. Not at my age. You don't just, he stopped, started again. You try. Even when you know. Castiel said nothing for a moment. Then, I understand that. I know you do. Naruto glanced at him. You've been trying to reach people who've already decided for most of your existence. Not always successfully. No. But you keep trying. Naruto looked back out the window. That's the thing in here. The chest gesture again. That's all it is. The thing that makes you keep trying anyway. They reached the Wichita Mountains as the sun was starting its late afternoon descent, the light going amber and long, and the Wichita Wildlife Refuge spread out ahead of them in the specific ancient beauty of land that had not been significantly rearranged by human activity. The site Gabriel had identified was 12 miles in on a fire road, at the base of a granite formation that pushed up out of the red earth with the unhurried authority of something that had been there since the Cambrian and intended to remain. Crowley's team was there, 2 demons in human vessels, standing at a discreet distance, and they reported, nothing. Site dormant. No activity in the 12 hours they'd been watching. He's waiting, Gabriel said. Yeah, Dean said. He was scanning the tree line with the practiced eyes of 20 years. For what? The answer came in the form of a man walking out of the trees. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not impressively tall, just enough that your eye noted it and moved on, which was itself a kind of precision, a height calibrated to be unremarkable. He wore clothes that belonged to no particular decade, a long coat the color of old stone, and his face was the face of someone who had worn many faces and settled on this one as a reasonable compromise between recognizability and anonymity. His eyes were dark and still and extraordinarily awake, the eyes of something that had been watching since before watchfulness had been categorized as a skill. He stopped 20 feet away. His eyes found Naruto. Something moved in them, the first thing that moved in them, because everything else in his expression was controlled with a precision that spoke of very long practice. The thing that moved was old and specific and complicated and lasted less than a second before being replaced by the stillness again. Malphas, Naruto said. His voice was even. Warm, actually, not artificially, not as a tactic. Genuinely warm, the warmth of something greeting something it has a real history with. Uzumaki, Malphas said. His voice was low and measured, with a quality underneath it like tectonic plates, slow, enormous, operating at a timescale that made immediacy feel like a category error. You got thin. I was asleep, Naruto said. You know how it is. I don't, actually. I haven't slept since the 3rd century. Malphas looked at the group behind Naruto, Dean, Sam, Castiel, Gabriel, Crowley, and his gaze moved through them with the unhurried thoroughness of an entity performing a categorization rather than an assessment. His eyes stopped on Gabriel for a moment. Gabriel. Gabriel said, and the nickname contained several centuries of complicated feeling compressed into 3 letters. You're all here, Malphas said, returning to Naruto. That's more than I expected. I thought the Winchesters, maybe. The demon. He looked at Castiel. The fallen one. But the trickster, he looked at Gabriel, you've been hiding for 2,000 years. You came out for this. Yeah, Gabriel said, simply. Something shifted in Malphas's expression at the simplicity of it. Something that might, in a different context, have been doubt. I got your letter, he said to Naruto. I know. The New Mexico woman, Malphas said. You were watching then too. I'm always watching. It goes both ways. Naruto took a step forward. Just one. Talk to me. Malphas looked at him for a long moment. I'm past talking. You came out of the trees. To see if you'd really come. Malphas looked at the granite formation behind them, at the red Oklahoma earth, at the sky going amber. I didn't think you would. I thought the array would draw you and then you'd see what it was and go back to sleep rather than engage. He looked back at Naruto. That was a miscalculation. You miscalculate less than you used to, Naruto said. Which means the miscalculation was something else. Which means part of you wanted to be wrong. The stillness in Malphas's face did a very controlled thing. The array is complete except for 3 anchors, he said. I'll have them active within 72 hours. The architecture will be accessible. I'll be able to read the foundational layer, the actual operating principles of this reality, not the translations and the copies and the fragmentary interpretations. Malphas, I'll be able to understand it, Malphas said, and under the controlled tone, under the tectonic patience, something raw and old and exhausted finally showed its face. Do you know how long I've been looking at the world through glass? Watching and recording and never understanding the thing underneath the thing? The ley lines are the nervous system of something and I don't know what the something is. I've spent 12 centuries building toward the moment where I can just read it directly. Just once. Just the truth of it, unmediated, and you'll break it, Naruto said. Not because you're careless. Because the copy isn't good enough. Because 3 degrees of error in a spiral proportion means your resonance model of me is wrong in ways you haven't accounted for, and when you run the array through an imprecise model, the feedback, I've modeled the feedback, Malphas said. You've modeled it using partial texts, Naruto said. You don't have the 9th fragment. Something went very still in Malphas's face in a way that was different from the controlled stillness. I have 8, he said. You have 7, Naruto said quietly. Someone sold you a fragment 3 years ago. In Istanbul. A demon with very old connections and an impressive collection of pre-Diluvian texts. Malphas's eyes moved to Crowley. Crowley met his gaze with an expression of mild regret. The market for ancient celestial documents is unpredictable, he said. Due diligence is difficult. The fragment you bought in Istanbul is a forgery, Naruto said. A very good one. Built from genuine fragments but assembled in the wrong order. It describes a secondary attribute as primary. Your resonance model has the proportions inverted in the 7th structural layer. He took another step forward. Run the array as you've built it and you don't access the foundational architecture. You create a feedback loop in the 7th layer that propagates through the entire ley line system. Malphas was silent. It won't destroy the world, Naruto continued. But it will damage the system in ways that will take centuries to repair. The ley lines will be compromised. The celestial architecture will degrade. Every living thing that's keyed to the deep resonance, he looked at Gabriel, at Castiel, will feel it. Prove it, Malphas said. His voice had the quality of someone who wants very badly to disbelieve something. I could, Naruto said. Or you could trust me. The silence stretched. Then Sam, who had been standing just behind Dean's left shoulder and had been completely silent since Malphas emerged from the trees, said, He's right about the 7th layer. I've been cross-referencing the fragment sequence with the Enochian geometric texts and there's an inversion in the pattern that doesn't match the original construction template. He held up his laptop. Look at the spiral proportions in what you're calling the 7th fragment. The inner radius is 3 degrees wider than the outer construction would require. It's not an error. It's a flag. Someone built that in deliberately. Malphas looked at Sam Winchester for the first time as something more than a categorized variable. He looked at him the way something very old looks at something that has surprised it. You read the Enochian construction texts, he said. He's been awake for 36 hours working on them, Dean said, with the specific pride of someone who would never describe themselves as proud of their brother in direct terms. The inversion, Castiel said, stepping forward with the precise momentum of someone who had been waiting for the right moment. I can show you. I have the primary source comparison here. He held out the papers from his coat, the ones he and Gabriel had been working on through the night, filled with Enochian characters annotated in Castiel's dense, careful hand. Malphas looked at the papers. He looked at them for a long time. Something happened in his face during that time, not a collapse, not a dramatic unraveling, but a slow movement, like tectonic plates adjusting, like the first hairline fracture in something very large and very old that has been under enormous pressure for an enormous amount of time. "The woman in New Mexico," he said finally, to Naruto, not looking away from the papers. "What was her name?" Naruto didn't hesitate. "Elena Vasquez. She was 73. She ran a trading post outside of Taos. She told you the world was worth saving and you told her you were working on a lever and she laughed and gave you coffee." Malphas stood very still. "And then you drove away and spent 3 more decades building the array," Naruto said quietly. "And every year after that you got a little more certain and a little less able to hear things like what she said." He stopped 3 feet away from Malphas. "I'm not asking you to abandon what you want to understand. I'm telling you the tool you built is flawed and if you use it you'll destroy the thing you're trying to read." He held Malphas's gaze. "Let me show you the correct proportions. The actual source. Not a copy." The Oklahoma sun was at the horizon now, going red, painting the granite formation behind them in colors that had no names in English. Malphas looked at Naruto. His eyes, those extraordinarily awake eyes, had something in them now that hadn't been there when he'd walked out of the trees. "You would do that," he said. "Show me." "If you stand down," Naruto said. "Deactivate the 6 anchors. Let the array go cold." He held out his hand, just his hand, open, the symbol briefly there on its back and then gone. "And then we talk. Properly. Like we used to." Every person behind Naruto was very still. Malphas looked at the hand. He looked at it for a long time. And then Dean's phone rang. The sound was catastrophically ordinary. Dean grabbed it, looked at the screen, Crowley surveillance team, Southern Anchor, Texas, and his face went tight. He looked up. "The Texas site just activated," he said. "It wasn't on the list." Everyone looked at Malphas. Malphas's expression did something complicated and then resolved into something that was not quite what it had been 30 seconds ago, not quite as close to the thing that had been reaching toward Naruto's open hand. "That's not mine," Malphas said. The silence that followed had a completely different quality from all the previous silences. "Not yours," Naruto said, and his voice had changed, sharpened, the warmth still present but now sitting on top of something else entirely, something that was paying very close and very precise attention. "Someone else activated an anchor." Malphas's eyes moved to the horizon, south, the same direction Naruto always looked, and the fact that they were both looking south at the same moment with the same quality of attention was not lost on anyone present. "There's a 9th player," Malphas said, and the word player carried the weight of something that had spent centuries watching games and knew exactly what that meant. Naruto closed his hand. "Yeah," he said, and his voice was very quiet and very certain and the gold was not flickering in his eyes now. It was simply there. Fully, completely, unambiguously there. "There is." The red Oklahoma sun finished its descent and left the sky dark and the stars sharp and the world very, very awake. Chapter 6, The War in Small Things. The Texas site was a collapsed mission church outside of Laredo, built in 1742 over a site that had been sacred long before any Spanish friar had thought to consecrate ground on this continent. Crowley surveillance team had been watching it since the Oklahoma meeting, and the report that came through 20 minutes after the first alert was not a field assessment so much as it was a man trying to describe something he didn't have language for. Dean read it aloud while driving south on I-35 at a speed that the state of Oklahoma had opinions about. Site activated at 1842. No visible agent. No Malphas pattern signature. The activation propagated from below the structure rather than from a point of contact, like a switch thrown from underneath. Anchor glyph matches the established pattern but the resonance quality is different. Wrong temperature. Field operative Carver reported losing consciousness for 4 minutes. Upon recovery, he described hearing something he called the oldest voice. He has since requested reassignment and will not elaborate. Dean lowered the phone. Wrong temperature. The anchors Malfa's built resonate at a specific frequency, Castiel said from the back seat. He was holding his papers, he hadn't put them down since the Oklahoma meeting, and his expression had the taut precision of something working at the edge of its knowledge. This activation reads differently. The same architecture, but a different hand. A different hand that knew where the anchors were, Sam said. And knew the construction sequence, Gabriel added, leaning forward between the front seats from the back, which Dean was ignoring because the alternative was stopping the car to have a conversation about personal space. You don't activate an anchor by accident. You have to know it exists, know what it's keyed to, and know the specific resonance signature required. He paused. That's proprietary information. Malfa's level proprietary. Unless someone's been watching Malfa's, Naruto said. He was in the back seat again, which he occupied with the same easy stillness he'd had since Kansas, except that the stillness was different now, not relaxed, but the kind of absolute quiet that something produces when it is paying attention to everything at once. His eyes were gold. Not flickering, not transitional. Just gold, full and sustained, and nobody in the car was going to mention it because the quality of the moment didn't invite the mention. Another watcher, Sam said. Or something that learned to watch from one. Naruto was looking south through the windshield. There are older things than Grigori in this world. Not many. But some. He paused. Things that were here when I was shaping the architecture. Things that understood what they were looking at. Could they use the anchors the same way Malfa's intended? Sam asked. Depends on what they want them for. Naruto pulled out his phone, the prepaid from the rest stop, which he'd apparently been maintaining with the same casual ease with which he maintained everything, and was reading something. The Texas site is anchor position 8 in Malfa's array. Whoever activated it jumped the sequence. He looked at the phone. Which means they don't care about the resonance buildup. They're not trying to access the foundational architecture gradually. They want the array active. Why? Dean asked. Because an active array does something useful even before the final anchor is triggered, Naruto said. 6 anchors give you a detection grid. 7 anchors give you a targeting system. 8 anchors give you, he stopped. Give you what? Sam said. A cage, Castiel said from the other side of the back seat. He'd arrived at the same place Naruto had, from the Enochian architectural texts, and his voice had the particular flatness of someone confirming something they'd hoped was wrong. 8 anchors in the correct geometric configuration create a contained resonance field. Large enough, to hold something, Naruto finished. To hold you, Castiel said. The car was quiet except for the engine and the road. Someone activated Anchor 8 not to build what Malfa's was building, Sam said, working it through, but to use what Malfa's already built as infrastructure for something else. A trap. A cage, Dean said. With him inside it. He looked in the mirror. What happens to you inside a resonance cage built from fragments of your own source architecture? Nothing permanent, Naruto said, in the tone of someone being technically accurate rather than reassuring. But it would limit my ability to act outside it. Contain my influence on the ley lines. Isolate me from the foundational architecture. He paused. Long enough for someone to do something they couldn't do with me free. Do what? Dean asked. Don't know yet, Naruto said. But the answer's in the 9th anchor. Malfa's was in Crowley's car, 3 miles behind them. This had been the outcome of a conversation in the Oklahoma clearing that had lasted approximately 4 minutes after the Texas alert and which had covered what to do with a rogue Grigori whose 12th century project had just been co-opted by an unknown third party, whether that party made Malphas an ally by default, and whether Crowley's car was the appropriate venue for that alliance. Malphas had agreed to come because the alternative was watching someone else use his work for purposes he hadn't intended, and whatever else he was, whatever the centuries of isolation and abstraction had done to him, the work was his, and the sense of violation at having it used without understanding was, apparently, still sufficient to override 12 centuries of methodical self-interest. Crowley had agreed to drive him because Crowley had excellent threat assessment and the very specific intelligence to recognize when the correct move was to keep your enemies in your car rather than your rear-view mirror. Gabriel had moved back to the Impala because, as he put it, the conversational atmosphere in Crowley's vehicle had shifted and he had a finely tuned instinct for not being present during territory establishment between two entities with the combined age of several geological periods. "He seems calm," Gabriel said, looking back through the Impala's rear window at Crowley's headlights. "Malphas. After the Oklahoma thing." "He's processing," Naruto said. "How do you know?" "Because that's what he does when he's recalibrating. Goes very quiet, very still. It looks like calm but it's actually something faster than calm." Naruto looked back at the road. "He'll have a lot of questions soon." "Is that a problem?" "No." Naruto's tone held something that was, underneath the gold-eyed focus, something like the warmth it had been before the Texas alert. "Questions from Malphas were always worth answering. That hasn't changed. He tried to build a cage for you." "Someone else is trying to build a cage for me," Naruto said. "Malphas was trying to read a book. Those are different problems." Gabriel looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who found this distinction more generous than circumstances warranted, and who also recognized that generosity wasn't the right word for it. "You actually missed him," Gabriel said. Naruto didn't answer. Which was, for him, an answer. They reached Laredo at midnight. The border city stretched along the river in its specific nighttime configuration of light and heat and traffic that never quite stopped. Crowley's surveillance team met them outside the city at a gas station that had been closed for years and was being used as a waypoint because Crowley's network had an impressive relationship with abandoned infrastructure. The field operative who'd lost consciousness for 4 minutes was there. He was a demon named Carver who looked like a man in his 40s and had the careful stillness of something very old and badly shaken. He stood apart from the others, and when Naruto got out of the car and the gold of his eyes was visible even in the poor parking lot lighting, Carver did what Gerald Hatch's legs had done and every animal Naruto had walked past had done and the gas station cat had done. He bowed. Full, deep, the bow of something responding to a signal deeper than thought. Naruto walked to him and put a hand on his shoulder, not a gesture of authority, not comfort exactly, just contact, the specific warmth of a presence that was bigger than the category of presence. "Hey," he said. "What did you hear?" Carver looked up at him. His eyes, demon eyes, dark and old, had something in them that most demon eyes didn't have anymore, not after the centuries of trading away the parts that felt things too much. "Something raw." "A voice," he said. "Not a sound. A quality. Like standing in a room where something enormous had just been said and the air was still holding it." He paused. "It said a name." "Whose name?" Naruto asked. Carver looked at him. "Yours." The parking lot was very quiet. "What name?" Naruto said carefully. "Specifically." Carver said a word. It was 12 syllables in a language that predated every human alphabet and most angelic ones, and the sound of it did something to the air in the parking lot, not dramatic, not violent, just a brief, total stillness, the kind that happens when the frequency of a large bell drops below human hearing but the body still feels it. Dean felt it in his chest. Sam grabbed the edge of the car without meaning to. Gabriel went very straight and very quiet, and Castiel's hands had gone still at his sides. Malphas, walking up from Crowley's car, stopped dead when he heard it. Naruto turned to look at him. Their eyes met, Naruto's gold, Malphas's dark and very, very awake, and something passed between them that was not a conversation but was more specific than a look. Recognition of a kind that only existed between things that had both been present at the beginning of something. "That's my original name," Naruto said, to the group. "The name I existed under before I took a vessel. Before I took a shape." He looked at Malphas. "Who knows that name?" "No one," Malphas said. "I don't know it. The texts I collected don't contain it." He paused. "The source texts, the real ones, not the fragments, might. But no one has accessed a complete primary source since before the first human civilization," Naruto finished. "Right. So whatever activated that anchor had access to a complete primary source," Sam said. "Or something that knew the original name directly." "Something that was there," Castiel said. "Or something that is part of the architecture itself," Naruto said, and his voice had gone to a place that it hadn't been before, not dark, not worried, but absolutely focused, the way a flame focuses when it finds oxygen. "Which changes the category of problem entirely." He started walking toward the collapsed mission church and nobody suggested he wait. The building was a ruin in the way that very old ruins are, not collapsed dramatically but subsided, settled into itself over centuries, the adobe walls rounded by weather, the roof gone, the interior open to the star-heavy South Texas sky. In the center of what had been the nave, the anchor stone was identical in type to the Arkansas one, irregular, dark, with the spiral circle 9-line symbol, but the glow from it was not amber. It was white. Cold white, the color of bone or of stars or of the light that precedes the kind of dawn that hasn't happened yet. Naruto stood at the edge of the nave and looked at it without moving for a full 30 seconds. Everyone else stopped at the broken doorway and didn't go further, not from any instruction but from the unanimous decision of people who had learned, over the past day and a half, to read the quality of Naruto's stillness and respond to it accordingly. This stillness was different from all the others. "Okay," Dean said, quietly. "What is that?" "It's not activated in Malphas's pattern," Castiel said, standing just behind Dean's shoulder. "The resonance is, it's using the same architecture but running it in reverse. Instead of building outward, it's drawing inward," Naruto said, without turning. "It's not a node in the array. It's an anchor point for a different structure entirely." He turned then, and in the white glow his eyes were the color of something that had been burning since before the earth had a crust. "This isn't about the array. This is about the name." "What does the name do?" Sam asked. "A true name, the original name, the name a thing had before it chose its shape." Naruto looked at the stone. "It's not a label. It's a description. A complete structural description of what a thing fundamentally is. If you have someone's true name and you have the right architecture, you can compel them," Gabriel said, from the doorway. His voice was flat with the recognition of something he'd known from the very beginning and had been hoping wasn't relevant. "Like demon trap compulsion, but foundational," Naruto said. "Not a trap for what I do. A trap for what I am." He looked at the stone. "Whoever this is, they've had the primary sources. They've had them for a long time. And they've been waiting for me to wake up." "Why wait?" Dean asked. "Because the name only works as a compulsion when the entity it belongs to is conscious and present in the world," Malphas said, from the back of the group. He'd moved up without anyone noticing and was standing at Sam's shoulder, looking at the white glowing stone with an expression that was the most human expression any of them had seen from him, something between horror and the specific self-directed fury of someone who has realized that their work has been used as scaffolding for something they would never have endorsed. "The anchors I built created a ley line network sensitive enough to locate and transmit a true name across the continental resonance field." He paused. "I built the delivery system. Without knowing what it was for," Naruto said. "Not an accusation. A statement of fact." "Without knowing," Malphas confirmed, and the weight of those two words from something that prided itself on knowing was its own sufficient punishment. "All right," Dean said, and his voice had the quality it got when he'd processed everything relevant and was now in the problem-solving register, the register that had gotten him through 30 years of things that should have killed him. Who has primary source access, knows a true name, has been patient enough to let someone else build their infrastructure for 12 centuries, and is now moving fast. Nobody answered immediately. Then Castiel said, "The empty." The word landed with the weight of a building. "The empty," Sam repeated. "It was the only thing present before everything else," Castiel said carefully, choosing each word with the precision of someone navigating a minefield. "Before God, before the darkness, before the primordial," he glanced at Naruto, "before everything. The empty existed. And it contains the true names of everything that has ever slept within it." He looked at Naruto. "Did you sleep in the empty? Before you took a vessel?" Naruto looked at him. And for the first time in the 36 hours they'd known him, the gold in his eyes did something other than burn steady. It flickered. "I passed through it," he said. "Once. A very long time ago. Before I understood what it was." "Long enough to leave a name," Castiel said. "Apparently," Naruto said. "The empty wants you contained," Sam said, working it through with the velocity of a mind that had been given the last piece of a very large puzzle. "Not dead. Contained. If you're contained in a resonance cage built from your own source architecture, it has what it needs to return me to sleep," Naruto said. "Indefinitely." He looked at the stone. "It's been awake since Cass died and came back from it. It's been annoyed about being awake. And now here I am, something with a true name it has on file, causing ripples in the ley lines, giving it a target. It's using Malphas's array to locate you and contain you, and then it uses the true name to compel sleep," Sam said. He stopped. "That's actually elegant." "Incredibly," Naruto said, with the tone of someone who could appreciate the architecture of something that was trying to imprison them. "If I were asleep and not present, I'd admire it more." Dean turned to Gabriel. "Can the empty do this? Does it have the capability to?" "The empty can do whatever it wants within the scope of dreams and sleep and the space between things," Gabriel said. "Running an external operation using a resonance array? That's new. He looked at Naruto, "that's motivated. The empty doesn't get motivated. It sleeps. It resents being awake. For it to build something this elaborate, it's not building," Naruto said. "It's using. There's a difference. It found Malphas's project in the ley lines and redirected it." He looked at the white stone. "It hasn't activated the Texas anchor for the array. It activated it as a test. It wanted to see if I'd come close enough for the name transmission to work." "Did it work?" Dean asked. "Carver heard the name from 20 feet away," Naruto said. "Imagine what it'll do at the final anchor with all 8 feeding the field." "The 9th anchor," Sam said. "Main. If the empty activates that, the cage closes," Naruto said. He looked north, the same precision of direction he always looked south, as if the cardinal points of the continental ley line map were written somewhere on the inside of his eyes. "Main is the final point. The convergence site there is," he stopped. "It's the original keystone. The first place the ley line architecture was anchored when the continent was being shaped." He turned back. "It's mine." "Yours," Dean said. "I put the first anchor there," Naruto said. "Before I went to sleep. It's the foundational point of the whole North American ley line system. If the empty activates that with the true name," he looked at his hand, at where the symbol appeared and disappeared, "it's not using the 8th fragment. It's using the original." "How long do we have?" Sam asked. Naruto looked at the white stone. "The empty is patient, but it's been awake for a while now and wakefulness irritates it. It'll move soon." He looked at Dean. "We need to be in Maine before it does." "Maine is 30 hours from here," Dean said. 22 If we move now and I ask the road to cooperate, Naruto said. Dean looked at him. Ask the road. Same principle as the branches in Arkansas, Naruto said. Things remember me. Roads are just shaped earth. Dean looked at the road. Looked at Naruto. Looked at the sky, which was providing no guidance. Fine, he said. But I'm still driving. Wouldn't have it any other way, Naruto said. They were moving in 10 minutes, which was fast even by Dean Winchester standards. Sam was on the phone with Castiel while simultaneously typing, coordinating what they knew about the main site, pulling the Men of Letters files on the Northeastern Ley Line network. Gabriel was calling in contacts, not heaven contacts, his own contacts, the network of beings across multiple planes of existence that a trickster archangel accumulated over 2,000 years of very social wandering. Crowley was texting with one hand and driving with the other, and doing both with the efficiency of a king of hell who had never in his operational life let urgency compromise precision. Malphas rode in silence in Crowley's passenger seat, which he had claimed with a directness that Crowley had not objected to, and looked out the window with the expression of something reordering its entire understanding of its own history. The Istanbul fragment, Crowley said, after about 30 miles of this. Was a forgery, Malphas said. I know. Crowley's voice was carefully neutral. I sold it to your intermediary. I didn't know it was part of a larger collection at the time. I acquired it in pieces and sold it in pieces, and I was not, he paused, I was not aware of the complete picture. And now you are. And now I am. Crowley looked at the road. For what it's worth, it's not worth much, Malphas said, without heat. But I don't blame you specifically. The empty had been seeding the market for years, apparently. Putting incomplete and counterfeit fragments into circulation specifically to ensure that whoever collected them would build a flawed array. It set you up, Crowley said. It used me, Malphas said. There's a distinction. He was quiet for a moment. The distinction matters because one of them is a story about my failure and the other is a story about something that understood my ambition and calculated precisely how to redirect it. He looked out the window. The second story is harder to sit with. Crowley said nothing. He knew, Malphas said. Uzumaki. He knew about the forgery. He mentioned the 7th structural layer inversion in Oklahoma. He stopped. He knew before we got to Oklahoma. He knew in the car, before we got there. Yes, Crowley said. He still offered to show me the correct proportions. Yes, Crowley said again. Malphas was silent for a long time. What kind of thing does that? He said finally. What kind of thing knows you've been building a cage for it, knows you've been using a flawed blueprint that someone else put in your path, and still, offers you coffee, Crowley said. Malphas turned to look at him. Metaphorically, Crowley said. Though actually in his case it's ramen. He glanced at Malphas. The kind of thing that does that is the kind of thing that's been watching the whole world for 30,000 years and finds people interesting in a way that isn't, he searched for the word, isn't academic. He's not studying you. He's not managing you. He looked back at the road. He just actually, genuinely, finds you worth engaging. At full attention. All of the time. Malphas looked at the road ahead. That woman in New Mexico, he said, after a long time. Elena Vasquez. He paused. She died 2 years after I met her. I checked, after Naruto mentioned her. Died in her sleep at 75. The trading post was inherited by her granddaughter. He paused again. I checked on the granddaughter too. I'm not certain what it was out of. Interest, Crowley said. The non-academic kind. Malphas looked at his hands in his lap. The granddaughter runs a small school now. In the same building. He was quiet. I didn't know I had checked on her until Naruto said the name. And then I knew I had, and I knew why, and it was, he stopped. Uncomfortable. Yes, Crowley said. That particular kind of self-knowledge tends to be. In the Impala, 2 miles ahead, Dean had the radio on. The song that was playing was not on any station. It was the frequency between stations again, but this time it wasn't whined through trees. It was something that sat on the threshold of melody, something that moved in the register below thought and above feeling, and it was warm in the specific way that things are warm when they are genuinely happy rather than performing happiness. Sam, half asleep in the passenger seat, said without opening his eyes, "Is that you?" "Bit," Naruto said, from the back. "You're playing music through the radio." "The ley lines run under the roads," Naruto said. "They connect to the grid. The grid connects to the broadcast infrastructure. It's not difficult." "You've been doing that this whole time," Sam said. "Only sometimes. Only when the silence felt like it needed something." Sam was quiet for a moment. "I liked the wind through trees one." "I know," Naruto said. "That was from the Ozarks. The trees there have been picking up ley line resonance for so long it's just part of how they sound now." Dean said nothing. He drove, and his hands on the wheel were easy, and the road unrolled ahead of them through the South Texas dark, and the music that wasn't on any station played something that moved like water over stone, unhurried, certain, going where it was going with the confidence of something that had always known the shape of the place it was headed. Gabriel, wedged in the back seat beside Naruto, had his head tilted back and his eyes closed, and was either asleep or doing something archangels did that looked like sleep but wasn't. Castiel was awake. He was always awake, in the way angels were always awake, and he sat in the back corner of the car and looked out the window and felt his grace doing what it had been doing since Nebraska, leaning, gently and without apology, toward the thing beside him. He had stopped being uncomfortable about it somewhere in Oklahoma. "Castiel," Naruto said quietly. "Yes. When we get to Maine." He paused. "If the empty has already activated the keystone, then the cage is closed and we'll need to find another way," Castiel said, before Naruto could finish the sentence in whatever direction it was going. Naruto looked at him. "I'm not useful inside a resonance cage," Castiel continued. "But outside one, with the correct Enochian counter-architecture," he looked at his papers, "I've been working on the counter-frequencies since the car. It's theoretically possible to interrupt the name transmission if I can get inside the resonance field and insert a harmonic dissonance at the 7th structural layer. The same layer with the inversion." He paused. "Malphas would need to confirm the geometric relationships." "You'd need to be inside the cage to do that," Naruto said. "Yes. While the name transmission is active." "Yes." Naruto looked at him for a long moment. "That would hurt you." "Probably," Castiel said. "Cass, you told Dean that question doesn't apply to you," Castiel said. "Danger. It doesn't apply to you the same way. But there are people in this car for whom it does apply and who are driving to Maine anyway." He looked at the window. The thing in here, the two-finger gesture, against his own chest, the same gesture he'd seen Naruto use twice now, the gesture for the wordless thing that made you keep trying, it points the same direction yours does. That's sufficient. The music from the radio did something quiet and warm. Naruto looked at Castiel for another moment and then looked at the road through the windshield, and the gold of his eyes in the dark of the car was the color of something that had just been given something it hadn't known it needed. "Okay," he said. Outside, the Texas dark was very large and very old and moving past them at 87 miles an hour, and the stars were doing what stars do in that specific expanse of sky, being preposterous about it, being so numerous and so indifferent and so beautiful that looking at them too long did something to your perspective on the scale of things. Dean looked at them in the windshield for exactly as long as was safe while driving, and then looked at the road, and drove. They had 22 hours. Chapter 7, 9 Tales, One Choice. Maine arrived the way the end of long drives always do, not suddenly, but in accumulation, the landscape shifting by degrees from the mid-Atlantic generic into something more specific, more itself, the hardwood forests thickening along the highway shoulders, the air coming through the cracked windows tasting different, older, carrying the cold salt suggestion of the Atlantic even 100 miles inland. The light in Maine had opinions. It fell at angles that made everything look like it had been there since before it was a good idea. They'd driven in shifts and arrived in 21 hours, which meant the road had cooperated. Dean hadn't asked how. The site was on a peninsula north of Castini, on land that belonged to nobody currently and had been contested by almost everybody historically, Penobscot, French, British, American, and before any of them, something older that had left no name in the record except the way the ground behaved. The men of letters had a file on it, 6 pages in a water-damaged folder that Sam had read twice in the car and summarized as, anomalous ley line convergence, pre-colonial sacred designation, repeated attempts at permanent settlement all abandoned, no documented reason. The undocumented reason was visible from 100 yards out. The land knew something was coming. The trees at the peninsula's edge were old-growth white pine, the kind that had been here before the first European ship had topped the horizon, and every one of them had inclined slightly toward the water, toward the point of the peninsula, the way the Kansas corn had inclined toward its center. Not violently. Not dramatically. With the quiet, unanimous lean of things responding to a signal they'd been hearing for 30,000 years and were now hearing on a frequency they hadn't felt since before human memory. "He's been here," Malphas said, stepping out of Crowley's car and reading the trees with the practiced attention of something that had spent millennia studying environmental resonance. "This is a response, not an activation. The site knows he's coming." "Does the empty know we're coming?" Dean asked, hand on the Impala's roof. "The empty knows everything happening in the ley line system," Naruto said. He was already out of the car, standing in the gravel pull-off at the tree line, looking at the water beyond. The Atlantic was gray and particular in the early morning light, moving with the specific indifference of large bodies of cold water. But knowing and responding are different things. It's not good at responding quickly. That's the one limitation of something that exists primarily as a space. It has to work through agents and through the architecture. It doesn't move in the physical world the way we do. So it's going to activate the final anchor through the array, Sam said. Remotely. Using the 8 active anchors as a transmission network. When? Castiel asked. "It was waiting for me to be close," Naruto said. "I'm close." He turned to look at the group, all of them, assembled in the gray Maine morning, the collective weight of everything they were, and something moved in his expression that was not calculation and not sentiment but lived in the territory between them. "When I cross the tree line, it'll start. Then we need the counter-architecture in place before you cross," Castiel said. "Walk me through it," Malphas said. He and Castiel had been working in the car for the last 4 hours, in the specific productive tension of 2 beings who had no reason to like each other and every reason to need each other's expertise, and the result was a set of modifications to the Enochian counter-frequency approach that had been refined by Malphas's 12 centuries of structural knowledge into something considerably more precise than what Castiel had conceived on his own. Malphas knew the resonance architecture the way a builder knows a building, not just the blueprint but the way it settled, the places where it ran true and the places where it had the specific imperfections that came from working with fragmentary sources. He knew where the 7th layer inversion sat in each of the 8 anchors. And he knew, now that he understood what the forgery had been designed to do, exactly how the inversion would propagate when the name transmission activated. "The transmission runs from the 8th anchor in Texas through the network to the keystone here," Malphas said, looking at Castiel's papers with the concentrated attention of someone reading music. "It uses the inversion in the 7th layer as a carrier frequency. The forgery wasn't just a flaw. It was a specific modification that made the array transmit at the frequency the true name resonates on." He looked up. "Elegant," he said, with the specific reluctant admiration of someone who wishes the thing they're complimenting had been aimed differently. "Can we interrupt it?" Sam asked. "At the keystone, yes. The 9th anchor here is the original. It doesn't have the inversion because it predates the construction of the other 8 by 30,000 years. If we introduce a counter-frequency at the 7th layer using the correct Enochian notation, Malphas looked at Castiel, the transmission hits a wall at the final point and the name compulsion fails to complete. What does incomplete compulsion do to him? Dean asked, looking at Naruto. Nothing lasting, Naruto said. It'll be loud. Like a bell going off inside your skull. He touched his temple briefly. I've dealt with worse. The problem, Castiel said, is that the counter-frequency has to be introduced inside the resonance field, which activates the moment Naruto crosses the tree line. I'll go in first, Castiel said. The field won't be active until he crosses, Malphas said. You can get to the keystone first. Set the notation. But when the field activates, it'll run through me on its way to him, Castiel said. I know. It'll use your grace as a conductor, Malphas said, with the flatness of someone delivering a medical prognosis. The resonance field keyed to his source architecture is the single most powerful celestial frequency in this hemisphere. Your grace will, I know, Castiel said again, and the repetition was not impatience. It was the specific clarity of someone who has made a decision and doesn't need the alternatives relitigated. Gabriel had been standing slightly apart from the group, leaning against a pine at the tree line, looking at the water through the trees. He turned around. I'll go with him, he said. Gabriel, Castiel started. 2 graces in the counter-frequency array, Gabriel said, looking at Malphas. Does that change the math? Malphas calculated. His expression did something complicated. It stabilizes it, he said finally. 2 complementary grace frequencies create a harmonic structure rather than a single conductor. The resonance field distributes across both instead of concentrating in one. He paused. It still won't be comfortable. I've had worse Tuesdays, Gabriel said. You've literally had worse Tuesdays, Dean said. You died on a Tuesday. 3 times, in fact. Gabriel shrugged with the physical nonchalance of someone who had renegotiated his relationship with death sufficiently to wear the nonchalance honestly. Look, Cass can't do this alone and someone has to do it with him, and the list of people in this parking lot who can function inside a full resonance celestial field is not long. He looked at Naruto. Right? Naruto looked at him for a moment. Right, he said quietly. Great. Gabriel clapped his hands once. So. Malphas shows us the notation, Cass and I go in, set the counter frequency, and then you hold it, Malphas said. You hold the counter frequency active while the transmission tries to run. The empty will push. It's not passive architecture, it's an active intelligence using the array as a tool. When it encounters the counter frequency, it'll try to overwhelm it. How hard will it push? Sam asked. Malphas looked at him with the expression of someone who has a numerical answer they've decided not to deliver numerically. Hard, he said. Okay, Dean said. Okay. While Cass and Gabriel are holding the counter frequency, I deal with the empty, Naruto said. Everyone looked at him. It's using the array as a medium, Naruto said. The name transmission is its primary move. If the counter frequency blocks the transmission, it'll need a secondary approach. Which means it'll manifest more directly. He looked at the tree line. I want it to do that. I want it to come here, present, into the physical ley line space rather than operating through the architecture from a distance. He paused. That's the only place I can actually talk to it. Talk to it, Dean repeated. You want to talk to the empty. I want to offer it a trade, Naruto said. What kind of trade? Sam asked. The kind it'll accept, Naruto said, and did not elaborate, and the quality of his not elaborating made everyone present decide, without consultation, not to push. What do we do? Dean asked. Meaning himself and Sam and Crowley. The human adjacent contingent. Stay outside the field, Naruto said. When I cross the tree line, the field activates and anything inside it is part of the resonance. You can't function in there, it'll incapacitate you and give the empty more to work with. So we watch, Dean said, and the two words carried everything they always carried when Dean Winchester was told to stay outside. You watch, Naruto said. And if I come back through the tree line looking like something other than myself, you do what you do best. Which is? Trust your instincts and shoot things, Naruto said, with the warm uncomplicated grin. You're very good at both. Dean opened his mouth, closed it, and then jerked his head at the tree line with the motion of a man accepting terms he doesn't love. Fine. The preparation took 40 minutes. Malthus worked with Castiel and Gabriel on the notation, which was not Enochian but the older structural language that predated it, the one Naruto had used for the letter, the one the ley lines themselves were written in, and the process of learning it in real time was visible in Gabriel's face as a concentrated, genuine effort that had nothing of the trickster in it and everything of the archangel. He learned fast. They both did. Malthus's teaching had the quality of something that had always been better at transmission than reception, 12 centuries of observation condensed into 40 minutes of precision instruction. Sam spent the 40 minutes pulling every piece of information about the empty from the bunker database via remote access, building a file with the specific urgency of someone who knows the file won't be complete but needs it to be as complete as possible anyway. He found 7 references, all oblique, all from sources that had encountered it tangentially rather than directly. The most useful was a single line from a Men of Letters journal dated 1954, "The empty is not nothing. It is the memory of nothing, which is a different and more dangerous thing." He read it twice and then turned to Naruto, who was standing at the tree line looking at the peninsula. "The memory of nothing," Sam said. "Apt," Naruto said. "It remembers what the world was before it had anything in it," Sam said. "That's what makes it angry about being awake. Every conscious thing in the world is a reminder of what it lost." Naruto looked at him. "You're good at this. Finding the thing underneath the thing. Understanding what something is by understanding what it's missing," Naruto said. "That's rare." He looked back at the trees. "The empty isn't evil. It's grieving, in the way that something that has never been able to grieve grieves, passively, structurally, by trying to return everything to the state that felt right." He paused. "The trade I'm going to offer it is something it actually wants. Something that gives it what it needs without taking anyone." He glanced at Sam. "That's the whole move." "What is it?" Sam asked. Naruto smiled. "If it works, I'll tell you after." Crowley had positioned himself at the tree line with his phone and his network and the specific operational efficiency of someone managing multiple intelligence streams simultaneously. He looked up when Naruto and Sam approached. "My anchors at the 8 active sites are reporting synchronized resonance increase across the board," he said. "It knows you're here." "Good," Naruto said. "The field at the keystone is already priming," Crowley continued. "Pre-activation resonance. Like an engine warming up." He paused. "My operative at the main perimeter says the temperature dropped 4 degrees in the last 20 minutes. No meteorological explanation. The empty runs cold," Naruto said. "It's the absence of warmth rather than the presence of cold, which sounds like a distinction without a difference, but it isn't." "Philosophically," Crowley said. "Practically," Naruto said. "Cold you can heat. Absence of warmth you have to fill." He looked at the tree line for a long moment. Then he looked at Dean, who was standing 10 feet away with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the specific way it set when he had committed to a course of action he was uncomfortable with. They looked at each other. Dean uncrossed his arms. He walked to Naruto and stood in front of him and said nothing for a moment, because the moment didn't need words, and Dean Winchester, for all his relentless verbosity in the face of most things, had an excellent instinct for when words were the wrong tool. He held out his hand. Naruto looked at it. Then he took it, the handshake brief and solid and carrying the specific weight of something that was more than a handshake, a statement, a commitment, a line drawn that was not about the world but about the 4 feet between two people who had known each other for 2 days and were behaving with the confidence of something much longer. "Don't be long," Dean said. "I'm never long," Naruto said. He turned to Sam, who held out the journal, not his own, the old battered one that had been Bobby's before it was Sam's. "In case you need a reference," Sam said. Naruto took it. Looked at it. Looked at Sam. Tucked it inside his jacket. "Thank you." "Castiel," Naruto said, turning. Castiel stepped forward. His eyes were very blue and very steady. "We'll hold it," he said. "I know you will." Naruto looked at him with the gold eyes, full and warm and ancient. "When it gets loud, and it's going to get very loud, stay on the counter frequency. Don't let it distract you. It'll use sound, sensation, memory. It's very good at memory." "I have a complicated relationship with memory," Castiel said. "That may work in my favor." "It will," Naruto said, and meant it specifically. He looked at Gabriel last. Gabriel was eating a candy bar. He was absolutely eating a candy bar at this specific moment, which Dean found either deeply irritating or deeply admirable and couldn't decide which. Gabriel met Naruto's eyes over the candy bar and the performance dropped, all of it, the casual ease, the deflecting humor, all of it, and what was underneath was the face of an archangel who had run from his family for 2,000 years because he couldn't bear what they were doing and who had come out of hiding for this the way you come out of hiding for the things that matter more than safety. "You were the reason I ran," Gabriel said. "You know that." "I know," Naruto said. "Don't make me regret coming back," Gabriel said. "I won't," Naruto said. Gabriel put the rest of the candy bar in his pocket. "Okay." He looked at Castiel. "Ready?" Castiel looked at Gabriel. "Ready." They walked into the trees. Malphas stood apart, watching them go, his hands at his sides and his face doing the long, tectonic thing it did when it was processing something at a scale that didn't resolve quickly. Naruto stopped beside him. "You don't have to stay," Naruto said. "I know," Malphas said. "But you are." "Yes." They stood side by side for a moment, looking at the trees that Castiel and Gabriel had disappeared into, and the old white pines leaned toward the water with their patient, unanimous inclination, and the cold salt air moved around them with the specific quality of main air that had been carrying this weight for 30,000 years and had decided, this morning, that the wait was nearly over. "After this," Malphas said. "You said you'd show me." "After this," Naruto confirmed. Malphas nodded once, and said nothing else, and the saying nothing else was itself a thing he'd gotten back in the last 12 hours, the ability to be in a moment without immediately filing it, to let something be present before turning it into data. Naruto looked at the trees for another moment. Then he walked across the tree line. The resonance field activated the instant his foot touched the pine needle floor of the peninsula, and the sensation was visible to everyone outside in the way that large forces are sometimes visible, not the force itself but its signature, the way the air between the trees sharpened, the way the temperature dropped another 2 degrees in under a second, the way every old pine on the peninsula straightened from its lean and stood exactly vertical with the specific attention of something responding to a frequency it had been waiting to hear. Inside the tree line, Castiel felt it. The field hit his grace like standing in the path of a river, not violent, but total, occupying every available space with a resonance that ran at a frequency his grace was not designed to carry. He pushed back instinctively, and beside him Gabriel was doing the same, and between them the counter-frequency notation they'd spent 40 minutes learning rose up from the point of the keystone where they'd inscribed it in the structural language, not Enochian letters in the air but something older, something carved into the stone itself by 2 graces working in tandem, burning at the inversion point of the 7th layer. The stone went white. Then whiter. Then something underneath the white began to push back. Outside the tree line, Dean felt the temperature drop hit his face like a door opening. He didn't reach for his gun because there was nothing to shoot at. He stood with his arms at his sides and watched the tree line and the light between the trees going from gray morning to something that wasn't a color so much as the memory of a color, the space where something should have been. Sam was beside him, silent, watching with the specific quality of attention that Sam gave to things he needed to understand completely and knew he was only going to see once. Crowley was on his phone, reading readouts from all 8 active anchor sites simultaneously, and his expression, controlled, precise, giving nothing away that wasn't deliberately given, had resolved into the expression he wore when the information he was reading was significant enough to earn his full attention and terrible enough not to perform his reaction to. All 8 anchors are at peak resonance, he said quietly. The transmission is running. The counter frequency's up, Sam said. Cass and Gabriel, yes, Crowley said. And something is, he looked at his phone, something is pushing back at the Texas site. Hard. The operative there says it's like a second network activating inside the first. He looked up. The empty. Inside the trees, Naruto felt it. The transmission hit him, not the name, the counter frequency was holding the name at the 7th layer, Castiel and Gabriel burning against it with everything they had, but the empty itself, the intelligence behind the array, arriving in the resonance field with the slow, enormous, cold presence of something that had been patient for longer than patience had a name. It wasn't a presence the way angels or demons were presences. It was more like the sudden awareness of a room you'd thought was empty that was, in fact, occupied, the revised understanding landing all at once, the air reorganizing itself around a consciousness that was not warm or cold in temperature but in nature, a consciousness that experienced the world as an intrusion on a silence it had been promised. Naruto stood at the center of the peninsula, at the keystone point, and the empty arranged itself around him in the ley line architecture the way a hand closes around something, and said, in the voice that had no sound, the voice Carver had described as the quality of air after something enormous had been said, "You were mine once. I passed through you," Naruto said, aloud, in the physical world, because he'd long believed that speaking in the physical world was an act of choosing it. That's not the same as being yours. You slept in me. For a moment. That moment is mine. You are indexed. I'm not a file, Naruto said. Everything is a file. Everything that has ever been still becomes mine eventually. I am patient. I know. Naruto looked at the keystone stone, at the white light of it where Castiel and Gabriel were holding the transmission at the 7th layer, at the visible effort of 2 celestial intelligences refusing to give ground. You've been patient for a very long time. And you're tired of being awake. Everything that is awake will sleep. It is the only truth. Eventually, Naruto said. Yeah. I know that too. He looked up, not at the sky, at something beyond it, at the layer of the world that he existed in at a depth nothing else here could reach. You want me asleep because I'm a disturbance. My being awake puts energy into the ley lines. It ripples. It makes things livelier than you prefer. You disrupt the order of rest. I do, Naruto said, simply. I'm sorry about that. I genuinely am. He paused. But here's what I want you to understand. He reached into his jacket and took out Sam's journal and held it for a moment before setting it down on the keystone stone. I've been watching this world for 30,000 years. I watched it before it had people on it. I watched the first things that were aware become aware. I watched what they did with awareness. What they built. What they broke. What they kept trying to rebuild. He stood back from the stone. And the reason I came back, the reason I woke up when the seal broke, wasn't because the architecture needed maintenance. It was because of them. The people doing the maintenance. He looked at the tree line, at the strip of visible gray sky above it. They don't know what they are. They don't have access to a foundational source. They can't read the ley lines. They have no index of their own true names. They just, his voice held something that was, underneath the gold and the ancient and the 30,000 years, as simple and specific as anything else he'd said, they just keep going. Because of the thing in here. The two-finger gesture. I want to watch that. For a while longer. I'm asking you to let me. The empty was quiet. The resonance field ran cold and enormous around the peninsula. Inside the trees, the counter-frequency held. It was costing Castiel enormously, his grace was running at the edge of its capacity, the resonance field pressing at every layer of what he was, and Gabriel beside him was blazing in the way that archangels blaze when they stop managing their power and let it run, which was not sustainable but was magnificent, and both of them were holding. You want to stay for mortals, the empty said. For these specific mortals, Naruto said. And because the world is worth being in. You know the architecture. You know what was built here. It didn't have to be good and it is, mostly good, in the way that imperfect things are good, not in spite of the imperfection but including it. He stepped forward to the center of the keystone, to the original anchor, the first point he had ever placed in the North American ley line system, 30,000 years ago, before sleep, before the world had a name. He put his hand on it. And opened. Not a controlled release. Not the managed, restrained signature he'd been carrying since Kansas, the version of himself calibrated for human company, the warmth and the blue eyes and the orange jacket and the borrowed cup of instant ramen. The full thing. The thing that had been sealed in a vessel not because it needed containing but because it had chosen a shape, and the shape had been right for 30,000 years, and it was right now, and it was also, for the 30 seconds he held the keystone, something else. The sky above the peninsula went from gray to gold. Not gradually. Instantly, complete, the way dawn changes a room, a fact rather than a transition. Dean, standing at the tree line, put his arm across his eyes and then took it down because he'd decided he was not going to look away from this regardless of what it cost him. What he saw was, a shape in the gold, large beyond the usual references for large, present in the way that very old things are present when they stop being careful, occupying not just space but the idea of space, filling the peninsula the way a tide fills a bay, thorough and specific and completely itself, and it was warm in the way that absence of warmth was not warm, warm the way the first morning after a long winter was warm, warm the way Hank Williams was warm, warm the way something is. Warm when it has chosen to be here, fully here, without reservation. The 9 tails were visible for 4 seconds. They were gold and enormous and moved with the specific unhurried sovereignty of something that had never once in 30,000 years needed to hurry, and the light from them hit the pine forest and the cold Atlantic and the red clay soil of Maine, and the light that came back was the light of things that had been recognized. The empty felt it. And the thing that the empty felt, the thing Naruto had been offering it since he'd walked across the tree line, the thing that was not a trade so much as a gift, the thing he'd understood it needed because he'd understood what it was missing, was warmth. Not heat. Not the radiant energy of a celestial force. The other kind. The kind that comes from something being fully, voluntarily, completely present in the world and recognizing the thing it's present in. You love it, the empty said, with the astonishment of something that has catalogued everything and never accounted for this. I do, Naruto said. And I'll love it while I'm here. And when I sleep again, and I will, eventually, the way everything does, I'll sleep warm. He looked at the presence of the empty around him, the cold intelligence of it, the vast grieving patience of it. You don't have to be cold. You're only cold because everything you hold was taken from the world before it was warm. But I'm not taken. I'm choosing. He paused. Feel the difference. The empty was silent for a very long time. The gold above the peninsula held. Then, slowly, starting at the edges where the gold light touched the pine trees and the Atlantic water and the cold Maine morning, something changed. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Small, the way the most real things are small, a degree of temperature, barely measurable, rising in the resonance field. The transmission stopped. Not countered, stopped, at the source, the empty withdrawing it with the deliberateness of something making a decision rather than being defeated. At the Texas site, Crowley's operative reported the 8th anchor going dark. At 7 other sites across the continent, simultaneously, 7 anchors followed. The ley line network went from peak resonance to baseline in the time it takes to stop holding your breath. Inside the trees, the resonance field dissolved. Castiel sat down on the pine needle ground, not because he'd chosen to but because his legs had made an executive decision. Gabriel was beside him, blazing down from full archangel radiance to more reasonable dimensions, and he said, voice rough with the specific roughness of having run his grace at maximum for 20 minutes, "Did it work?" Castiel looked at the keystone stone. The white light was gone. The stone was dark, dormant, ordinary. "Yes," he said. Gabriel sat down next to him. "Good," he said, and leaned back on his hands and looked up through the pine canopy at the sky, which was gold and then less gold and then the gray of a Maine morning, returning to itself, complete. Outside the tree line, Dean was moving before the gold had fully faded, walking through the trees with Sam behind him, and he found Naruto standing at the keystone with his hands still on the stone and the orange jacket and the sun-gold hair and the blue eyes, blue again, fully blue, ocean floor blue, and he stood in front of him and looked at him and said nothing for a moment because after what he'd just seen, the words that were available seemed undersized. "Hey," Dean said finally. "Hey," Naruto said. "The 9 tails thing," Dean said. "Yeah. You couldn't have maybe," Dean stopped, restarted. "No. Forget it." He looked at him. "Did it work?" "The empty took the offer," Naruto said. "It's withdrawing from the array. The anchors are going dark." He looked at the stone under his hand and then lifted his hand from it. "It won't be back. Not for this." It got what it needed. Which was to understand what I was staying for, Naruto said. It couldn't comprehend the choice. Once it could, once it felt what the choice felt like, it wasn't angry about it anymore. He paused. The empty is profoundly, foundationally, lonely. It's been alone since before the word existed. It doesn't want company. But it wanted to know that something chose the world over the sleep. It wanted to know the world was worth choosing. He looked at Dean. "It is." Dean held his gaze for 3 seconds, the same 3 seconds it had taken at the rest stop in Kansas when Naruto had said the question of danger doesn't apply to me, and this time Dean didn't look away and didn't look like he needed to. "Yeah," Dean said. "It is." Sam was kneeling by Castiel, checking him over with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing field triage on celestial beings for years. Castiel was accepting the assessment with the patient dignity of something that was fine but recognized the importance of letting the people who cared about you confirm that. Gabriel was still sitting on the ground, eating the rest of the candy bar from his pocket, looking at the pine canopy with the expression of someone who has run very hard and is now entirely at rest. Malphas had come through the tree line. He stood at the edge of the clearing around the keystone, looking at the dormant stone, and his face was doing all the slow tectonic things it did, except that what was moving now was something different from what had moved before. The recalibration was visible, ongoing, enormous in scale. Naruto walked to him. "The array is dead," Malphas said. "Yes. 12 centuries," Malphas said. Not bitterly. Not with grief. With the specific weight of something that is telling itself the truth about the scale of something. "Yes." And the 7th fragment, Malphas stopped. The whole 7th layer was wrong. "Yes." Malphas was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Show me." Naruto looked at him. The gold was gone from his eyes, just blue now, just the deep impossible blue, and the warmth in his face was the warmth it had been in Kansas and in the car and at the gas station, the warmth of something that found the world interesting and found the people in it worth his full attention. "Here?" he asked. "Yes," Malphas said. "Here." Naruto put out his hand again. The symbol appeared on the back of it, not briefly, not flickering. Fully, sustained, the spiral inside the circle with 9 lines, each proportion exact, the geometry that predated every human attempt to describe it and that every human attempt to describe it had been reaching toward. Malthus looked at it. For the first time in 12 centuries, Malthus looked at something and did not immediately classify it. He just looked. The old white pines stood around them in the gold-going gray morning, straight and still and present, the way old things are present when the thing they've been waiting for has finally arrived. Chapter 8, Why the Fox Stays 3 Days After Maine. Dean Winchester was in the bunker kitchen at 7 in the morning making eggs, which was a deeply ordinary thing to be doing and which he was doing with the specific deliberateness of someone who had spent the previous 72 hours in contact with forces that predated breakfast and was now finding breakfast enormously meaningful as a result. The eggs were over easy. The coffee was strong. The radio on the counter was playing something old and country that he'd found on an actual radio station for once, and the bunker was quiet in the particular way it was quiet when everyone in it had been through something large and was now in the process of returning to themselves through ordinary behavior. Sam was at the main table with 3 open laptops and a pot of coffee he'd made at 5:30, cross-referencing the site reports Crowley had sent through. All 8 anchors confirmed dark. No residual resonance at any of the sites. The ley line readings across North America had returned to baseline over the 36 hours following Maine, the network resettling into its normal patterns the way water resettles after you remove your hand from it. Malthus had spent 2 days with Naruto in the bunker library. Dean had looked in on them once, late on the first evening. They'd been at the table surrounded by texts, and Naruto had been showing Malthus something in the older structural language, not the ley line architecture, something more fundamental than that, something that was, as far as Dean could tell from the quality of Malthus's attention, exactly what 12 centuries of incorrect methodology had been trying and failing to reach. Malthus was reading it with his whole face, with the comprehensive attention of something that had been hungry for a very long time and had finally been handed actual food. Dean had decided not to interrupt and had closed the door quietly. On the morning of the second day, Malthus had come out of the library and found Dean in the kitchen and sat down at the table and said, without preamble, "The school in New Mexico. Elena Vasquez's granddaughter." Dean had looked up from his coffee. "Yeah. She's funding it herself. The school. It's not attached to any district. She teaches reading and basic mathematics to children whose parents work in agriculture." Malthus looked at his hands on the table. "She has 12 students currently. She's trying to find money for a 13th desk." Dean had looked at him for a long moment. Then he'd looked at the ceiling, decided something, and said, "Crowley owes me a favor. He has resources." Malthus had looked at him with the expression of something recalibrating for the second time in 3 days. "You would do that?" "Kid needs a desk," Dean said. "Not complicated." Malthus had been quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I suppose it's not." He'd left the bunker that afternoon, on foot, north, with no stated destination and no request for transportation and one of the men of letters notebooks under his arm that Sam had offered him without being asked. Something in the way he walked, less the geological patience of something operating at a timescale that made human movement feel like static, and more the ordinary deliberate pace of something going somewhere it had decided to go, was different from the way he'd walked out of the Oklahoma trees. Sam had stood at the bunker entrance and watched him go and written something in his journal and then gone back inside. Castiel had spent the 3 days in quiet recovery, which for an angel meant sitting in one place and running his grace through diagnostic repairs with the patient thoroughness of someone retuning an instrument. Gabriel had stayed. This surprised everyone, including apparently Gabriel, who had shown up on the second morning in the kitchen looking for food and wearing an expression that suggested he'd intended to leave and had instead found himself still there and was making peace with it. He and Castiel had talked. Not about the main operation, not about the empty, not about 12 centuries of complicated Grigori architecture. They'd talked the way people talk when they've been through something together and found out something about each other that makes the complicated history feel more navigable, not resolved, not explained, but placed in a context where it fit differently. Dean had walked past the common room twice during these conversations and both times had felt, from the hallway, the specific warmth of something being repaired that he hadn't known was broken. Crowley had departed for hell with the efficiency of a man who had been absent from his kingdom for 4 days and intended to address the accumulated administrative backlog before anything grew a coup in the interim. He had shaken Naruto's hand at the bunker entrance, not the inclined bow of Oklahoma, something more level, the handshake of something that had updated its category, and said, "If you need anything that requires a network, resources, or the collected intelligence of several thousand years of infernal surveillance, you know how to reach me." "I'll call," Naruto had said. "See that you do," Crowley had said, and had walked to his car with the immaculate posture of a man who had made excellent decisions this week and intended to remember that when the next set of impossible decisions arrived. Now Dean was making eggs and the bunker was quiet, and Naruto came into the kitchen at 7:15 and looked at the coffee maker with the expression of someone who had never once in 30,000 years taken a functional coffee maker for granted. He poured himself a cup. He sat down at the kitchen table. He drank it. Dean put a plate of eggs in front of him without being asked. Naruto looked at the eggs. Looked at Dean. "Thank you," he said. "You helped save the world," Dean said, sitting down across from him with his own plate. "Eggs are the minimum. I helped save it from a problem that was partly caused by me being asleep," Naruto said. "Sure. But the ratio still works out in your favor." Dean ate. Naruto ate. The radio played. The bunker hummed with its deep, old building presence. "So," Dean said, eventually. "So," Naruto said. "What happens now?" Naruto looked at his coffee. "What do you want to happen?" "That's not an answer," Dean said. "It's the relevant question," Naruto said. "I've been doing what I do for 30,000 years, and the one thing I've learned about the world is that it shapes around choice. Not fate, not architecture, not the plans that get made in heaven or hell or anywhere else. Choice." He looked up. "So what do you want to happen?" Dean looked at him for a long moment with the expression he wore when he was being honest in a way that cost him something. "I want you to stay," he said. "Which is a completely insane thing to want, and I'm aware of that, and I'm saying it anyway." "Why?" Naruto asked. Not challenging, genuinely curious, the way he was genuinely curious about everything, the full attention curiosity that had apparently been one of his consistent qualities for 30 millennia. Dean thought about this with more care than he usually gave to the verbal expression of feeling. "Because you make things make sense," he said at last. Not the big things. I've always been fine with the big things, I've been handling apocalypses since I was 30. I mean the small things." He gestured with his fork, generally, at the kitchen, the bunker, the radio playing. "The way things are worth being in when you're around. The way you look at the world like it's interesting and it makes it interesting to look at." He paused. "Also you're useful." "I'm very useful," Naruto agreed. "Don't make it weird." "You're the one making it weird." Naruto was smiling. "The warm one, the private one." "I'm staying," he said. Simply, without ceremony. Dean put his fork down. "Yeah. I told the empty the world was worth choosing," Naruto said. "I meant it. And choice that you mean has consequences." He looked around the kitchen, the old appliances, the bunker walls, the coffee maker, the radio, the profound accumulated ordinariness of a home that had been built inside a fortress by people who'd needed both. "I'd like a room," he added. "If there's one available." "There are 47 rooms," Dean said. "I want one near the library." "Done." Dean picked his fork back up. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment. The radio found Hank Williams, "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry," with the timing of something that was not a coincidence and that Dean was going to treat as one anyway because some gifts were better received without examination. He looked at the radio and then at Naruto, and Naruto had his eyes half closed, listening, the specific expression of someone hearing something they've been hearing for a very long time and finding it still exactly right. Sam came into the kitchen at 7:30 with the third laptop under his arm and the expression of someone who had been waiting an appropriate amount of time to ask questions and had decided the time was now. He poured coffee. He sat down. He put the laptop on the table, looked at Naruto, and said, "I have a list." "I assumed," Naruto said. "It's a long list." "I assumed that too." Naruto looked at him with full, warm attention. "Go ahead." Sam opened the laptop. The primary source texts. The original structural language. The complete record of the ley line architecture. He looked up. "Are those accessible? To you? In a form you can use?" "With enough time and the right context, yes." Naruto drank his coffee. The structural language is learnable. It takes a while, it's not built on phonemes or grammar, it's built on geometric relationships. You'd need to approach it the way you approach music theory rather than linguistics. Sam's pen was moving. "And the ley line architecture is mapped in the bunker already," Naruto said. "Partially." The men of letters got further than they knew. They were missing the primary reference key. He reached into his jacket and took out the symbol on the back of his hand, not by pressing his fingers to it this time, but by holding his hand flat on the table and letting it appear there, fully, sustained. This is the reference key. If you photograph it in high resolution and cross-reference it with the bunker's existing ley line maps, Sam already had his phone out. "Take your time," Naruto said, amused. "I've been waiting for 3 days," Sam said, photographing the symbol from 4 angles with the focused efficiency of a man who had been sitting on intellectual excitement out of conversational courtesy and was now releasing it in controlled bursts. Do you know what this means for our understanding of how the whole system?" Sam, Dean said. "Right," Sam said. "Sorry." He put the phone down. Looked at Naruto. "Thank you." "You're welcome." The symbol faded. Naruto folded his hands around his coffee cup. "What else is on the list?" "The empty," Sam said. "The deal you made, what exactly did you offer it?" "I told you after," Dean said. "He said he'd tell us after." "This is after," Sam said reasonably. Naruto looked at them both. "I didn't make a deal," he said. That's the short answer. Deals involve exchange. I give you this, you give me that. What I offered the empty was an experience. He paused. It's never felt warmth. Not once, in all of its existence. Everything it contains is cold because everything it holds was removed from the world before it finished being warm. I let it feel, through the resonance field, through my full presence, what it's like to choose to be here. What the world feels like from inside the choosing. He looked at his coffee. It was enough. It was more than enough. It had never had that before. You gave it a feeling, Sam said. I showed it something it couldn't have and couldn't take and couldn't index, Naruto said. And that was enough to make it step back. Not forever, nothing with the empty is forever. But for now. For a long now. How long? Sam asked. Long enough, Naruto said, which Sam recognized as the answer that meant, long enough to matter, and that's what matters. The Grigori, Sam said, moving down his list. Are there others? Besides Malphas? A few, Naruto said. Dormant, mostly. Malphas was the most active in the past several centuries. The others have been quiet. He paused. Quiet in the same way I was quiet. Watching. Processing. Some of them have been doing it for so long they've lost the thread of why. He looked at the wall. That's the real problem with watching without being part of the thing you're watching. The why erodes. He looked back at Sam. It's why I always came back. Why I always took a vessel and walked around in it. You have to stay inside the thing to remember what it's for. Is that why you took this one? Sam asked, the way Sam asked the questions that other people thought about but didn't say. The vessel. The shape you're in. I took this shape because it fit the world I was going back into, Naruto said. And because the shape had its own history, its own story. A boy who carried something enormous and made it work through sheer determination rather than sophistication. He tilted his head at Sam with something close to a grin. You're going to have thoughts about the metaphor there. I already have thoughts, Sam said. I know. Naruto finished his coffee and stood up and stretched, the long whole body stretch of something that spent a lot of time in a seated position and had opinions about it. What's after Grigori on the list? About 40 more questions, Sam said. We have time, Naruto said, and picked up Sam's empty coffee cup and refilled it without being asked, and set it back down in front of him, and the gesture was so ordinary and so specific and so warm that Sam looked up from the laptop for a moment with the expression of someone who had been getting used to something extraordinary and had just been caught off guard by how normal it had become. Gabriel appeared in the kitchen doorway at 8, which was early for Gabriel in the specific way that 8 in the morning was early for someone who had once spent 47 years as a nightclub owner in Ibiza. He looked at the coffee maker, the eggs, the 3 people at the kitchen table, and said, Is there food? Make your own eggs, Dean said. I don't cook, Gabriel said. You're a divine being of immeasurable power, Dean said. You can snap something into existence. It tastes different when you make it yourself, Gabriel said, sitting down at the table with the confidence of someone who had decided he was staying and was no longer being coy about it. He looked at Naruto. For what it's worth, he said, in the tone he used when he was being direct without the performance, I've been thinking about what you said. In the clearing. Which part? Naruto asked. The part about watching without being inside the thing, Gabriel said. About the why eroding. He looked at his hands on the table. I left heaven because I couldn't be inside what they were doing. But I didn't come back to anything. I just moved around. Outside everything. He paused. 2,000 years of outside. And? Naruto said. And I think I'm done with outside, Gabriel said, with the simplicity of something that has been true for a while and is being said for the first time. He looked at Castiel, who had appeared in the doorway behind him, which suggested that Castiel had been awake for longer than his arrival implied and had heard at least some of this. Something moved between them, not the complicated ancient sibling angel politics something, the other something, the thing that had been building since Gabriel had sat next to Castiel on the pine needle floor of the main peninsula and said did it work. Something warmer than history. There's room, Castiel said, looking at Gabriel. Here. If you want it. Gabriel held his gaze for a moment. Yeah, he said. Okay. Dean looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone who had feelings about the turn of events and was choosing to process them by looking at the ceiling until the feeling became manageable. Sam was writing in his journal with the unsentimental efficiency of someone recording what was actually happening rather than what people were managing their reactions to. All right, Dean said, bringing his eyes back down. Somebody make more eggs because apparently we're feeding the whole, whatever we are, today. What are we? Gabriel asked. The question sat in the kitchen for a moment, honest and slightly unwieldy, the way real questions sit. Naruto was at the counter, already cracking eggs into the pan with the focused ease of someone who had apparently been watching people cook for long enough to have absorbed the technique without ever being formally taught. He looked over his shoulder at Gabriel. What do you want to be? He asked. Gabriel thought about it. Something that has a kitchen, he said. And a reason to be in it. That's a start, Naruto said, and turned back to the eggs. Outside the bunker, the Kansas morning was doing what Kansas mornings did, wide and gold and ongoing, the sky enormous in its familiar way, the land flat and sure under it. The ley lines ran below the surface of all of it, the foundational architecture of the continent running quiet and steady and warm in the specific way it had been running since the morning 3 days ago when Naruto had put his hand on the main keystone and let the full weight of what he was move through the network, and the network had felt it and settled. It was running warmer than it had in 3,000 years. Not measurably, not in any instrument that existed. But in the way that Gerald Hatch's crows would return to the eastern tree line that afternoon and settle there without explanation, in the way that a gas station cat in Missouri would sit in the early morning sun with an expression of deep, unasked-for satisfaction, in the way that a woman in New Mexico who ran a small school in her grandmother's trading post would walk in that morning to find a new desk, solid, wooden, unaddressed, simply there, and would stand and look at it for a long moment before calling her 12 students in. In the way that Dean Winchester, eating breakfast in his bunker with his brother and an angel and an archangel and the primordial fox deity who had decided the world was worth staying in, felt, not safe, not certain, not free of the particular category of violent chaos that had been his entire professional experience, but oriented. Pointed the right direction. Like something in him that had always been working from a bad map had been handed, quietly and without ceremony, a better one. He didn't say any of this. He ate his eggs. He drank his coffee. He looked at Naruto at the stove, making eggs for an archangel in an orange jacket with his sun-gold hair and his impossible eyes, in a bunker in Kansas, in a world that had been worth choosing, and felt the specific wordless weight of a thing being exactly what it should be. Sam looked up from his journal. He looked at Dean. Something passed between them. The look that had a 30-year conversation inside it, the look that covered everything from the back seat of the Impala through every impossible thing they'd survived and into this specific kitchen on this specific morning, and both of them reached the same place at the same time, the place past words where things either are or they aren't. They were. "Hey," Dean said, to Naruto's back. Naruto looked over his shoulder. "You're going to need a better jacket," Dean said. "That one's going to fall apart eventually." Naruto looked down at the orange jacket. "It won't," he said. "Everything falls apart eventually." "Not everything," Naruto said, and turned back to the eggs, and the radio played, and the bunker was warm, and outside the Kansas sky went on being exactly as wide and exactly as gold as it had been every morning since before anyone had been around to see it, which was a long time, which was long enough, which was, all things considered, exactly right. Later that morning, after breakfast, after Sam had spent an hour photographing the symbol from 7 additional angles and Castiel had added 12 pages to the counter-frequency notes he was compiling into what would eventually become the most comprehensive manual on Enochian structural architecture ever assembled outside of heaven, and after Gabriel had eaten 4 helpings of eggs and looked progressively more at home with each one, Dean walked to the room he'd unlocked for Naruto. Naruto was standing in the middle of it, looking at the window. The sunlight came through it and fell on him the way sunlight always fell on him, with particular ease, like light returning to something that had always been its natural surface. "Okay?" Dean asked, from the doorway. "Perfect," Naruto said, and meant it the way he meant everything, simply, completely, without performance. Dean nodded. He started to turn. "Dean," Naruto said. Dean looked back. Naruto was still looking at the rectangle of sky. "Thank you," he said. "For this." He stopped, started again, in the way of someone finding that the full thing they want to say doesn't fit in the usual containers for saying things. For treating the waking up like it was worth doing something with. He looked over his shoulder. Some things wake up and nobody notices. It matters, when someone notices. Dean held his gaze for a moment. He thought about Kansas and the cornfield and the fence post and the first pair of those impossible eyes and the specific weight of 2 days that had rearranged his entire category of experience. "We noticed," Dean said. He went back down the hallway, hands in his pockets, back toward the main room where Sam was researching and Gabriel was looking for more food and Castiel was writing in the careful dense script of something working toward an understanding it intended to complete. Back toward the coffee and the radio and the ongoing, ordinary, extraordinary work of people who had decided the world was worth the trouble of it. Behind him, in the room near the library, Naruto looked at his rectangle of Kansas sky, and the sunlight moved across the floor as the morning progressed, and somewhere below the bunker the ley lines ran warm and steady and patient, and the world turned on its axis the way it always had, certain, continuous, and filled, in every acre of it, with the particular kind of life that springs from things that have decided to stay.